As always, if you enjoy the story, please hit that like button. If you have a location idea for future stories, so if there's a specific town or city, drop the name in the comments below. Now, let's get started. Chapter 1: The Triceratops Incident. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a divorced woman in possession of a bruised ego must be in want of a giant inflatable dinosaur and a stiff drink, though not necessarily in that order. Chloe Donovan was currently in possession of the dinosaur. The drink was, tragically, 10 feet away on a poolside table, sweating condensation and mocking her. Currently, Chloe was losing a wrestling match with a 6-foot-long, purple Triceratops named Trixie in the middle of the Star Plunge mineral pool. The water was warm, the Wyoming sun was hot, and her dignity was rapidly evaporating along with the sulfurous steam rising from the springs. From the safety of a chaise lounge, Mark Donovan watched his younger sister flail. He took a long pull from his beer, his internal monologue consisting entirely of self-congratulation for hosting the best welcome home / sorry your husband was a bore pool party Thermopolis had ever seen. He found the sight of Chloe, petite and fierce, trying to mount the inflatable beast absolutely hysterical. He loved her dearly, but he had been waiting 27 years for her to fall off a dinosaur in public. Chloe, meanwhile, was plotting Mark's murder. "Just get on the float," she told herself, gripping the slick purple plastic. "You are 27 years old. You survived a 3-year marriage to a man who organized his spice rack alphabetically by Latin genus. You can conquer a pool toy," she lunged. The Triceratops squeaked in protest. Chloe's wet hand slipped, and she face-planted into the mineral-rich water with a splash that lacked any semblance of grace. 3 days earlier, the scene had been decidedly less aquatic. Chloe had stood in the driveway of Mark's sprawling ranch house, staring at the red dirt and the distant Owl Creek Mountains. Her Honda Civic was packed to the roof with boxes labeled clothes, books, and regret. Mark had come out onto the porch, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He hadn't changed much in the 2 years since she'd last visited. He was still tall, still had that messy hair that refused to obey a comb, and still wore that grin that suggested he knew exactly what you were thinking and found it funny. "You're late," Mark had said, tossing the rag onto the railing. "I told Luke we'd have steaks on the grill by 6. I had to stop for gas in Shoshone," Chloe had replied, leaning against her car door. She felt fragile, like a piece of china that had been glued back together but was missing a few shards. "And I had a minor panic attack near the Wind River Canyon tunnels. Standard operating procedure." Mark had walked down the steps and pulled her into a hug that squeezed the air out of her lungs. He smelled like engine oil and barbecue sauce. He was a tool, Chloe. "You're better off here. Besides, we have hot springs. And dinosaur bones. What did Denver have? Traffic and high rent." Brad wasn't a tool. Chloe had mumbled into his flannel shirt, though she knew he was right. He was just precise. "He ironed his jeans, Chloe. That's not precise. That's a cry for help." Mark released her and grabbed a box from the back seat. "Come on, Luke's coming over later. Try not to look like a kicked puppy. It depresses the livestock." Back in the present, the water in the Star Plunge churned as Chloe surfaced, coughing and sputtering. She wiped her dark hair out of her eyes, her mascara likely making her look like a raccoon that had gone a few rounds with a garden hose. "You know," a deep, baritone voice rumbled from the edge of the pool deck, "it's technically illegal to harass the local wildlife, even the inflatable kind." Chloe froze. She knew that voice. It was the voice of authority, of reason, and of the man who had once dunked her pigtails into a bowl of mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving. She treaded water and turned slowly. Sheriff Luke Buchanan stood at the edge of the pool, thumbs hooked into his duty belt. The beige uniform should have looked ridiculous. It was a lot of polyester for one man, but on Luke, it looked like a recruitment poster for law enforcement. He was 6'3" of solid Wyoming dependability. His brown eyes were hidden behind aviator sunglasses, but Chloe knew they were currently crinkled in amusement. Luke, however, was not as amused as he appeared. In fact, his internal state was currently undergoing a catastrophic system failure. He had walked into the pool area expecting to see Mark and perhaps a few buddies. He had expected to see little Chloe, the scrawny kid with braces who used to follow them around on bikes, asking annoying questions about fishing lures. He had not expected this. The woman in the pool was definitely Chloe, but the braces were gone, and the scrawny knees had been replaced by a topography of curves that his brain was having trouble processing. She was wearing a green bikini that matched her eyes, a fact he noted with a sudden, uncomfortable tightness in his chest. The water sluiced off her shoulders, glistening in the sunlight, and for the first time in his 33 years, Luke Buchanan forgot his own name. Don't look, his conscience warned him. That's Mark's little sister. That is the forbidden zone. That is a felony against the bro code. Look, his libido countered. Just a little. It's for safety. You have to assess the situation. Sheriff? Chloe said, her voice dripping with false dignity as she bobbed in the water. To what do we owe the pleasure? Here to arrest Trixie for public intoxication? Luke crouched down, balancing effortlessly on the balls of his feet. He took off his sunglasses, revealing those warm, steady brown eyes that Chloe had secretly sketched in her notebooks during high school, a fact she would take to her grave. Just a noise complaint. Luke deadpanned, ignoring Mark's snort of laughter from the lounge chair. Neighbors reported a woman screaming obscenities at a dinosaur. Figured it was either you or a very confused tourist. I wasn't screaming, Chloe defended, paddling toward the edge. I was negotiating. You were losing, Luke pointed out. 15 years ago, the dynamic had been simpler, but the humiliation had been similar. It was a blistering July afternoon. 12-year-old Chloe had insisted on joining 18-year-old Mark and Luke for a hike up to the rim rocks. She wanted to prove she wasn't a baby. She wanted to prove she could keep up. Luke had been lanky then, all elbows and knees, but he had already possessed that calm patience. When Chloe had slipped on a patch of loose shale and scraped her knee bloody, Mark had rolled his eyes and sighed. Great, now we have to go back. But Luke hadn't sighed. He had knelt, uncapped his canteen, and washed the grit from her knee. He had looked at her, his face serious. It's a battle scar, Chloe. Means you're tough. It hurts, she had sniffled, trying not to cry in front of them. Pain is just weakness leaving the body, Mark had quoted from a movie, punching Luke in the shoulder. Luke had ignored him. He turned his back to Chloe and squatted down. Hop on, I'll carry you to the trailhead. She remembered the smell of him then, soap and summer dust. She remembered wrapping her skinny arms around his neck and feeling safe. He had carried her for 2 miles without complaining once. He was her hero, her secret crush, and completely unattainable. Back at the pool, the attainable distance between them was closing rapidly. Chloe placed her hands on the pool deck to hoist herself out. She hesitated. Hoisting oneself out of a pool is rarely a graceful maneuver, unless one is a trained SEAL or a supermodel, and Chloe was neither. Luke, seeing her hesitation, extended a hand. His hand was large, calloused, and scarred from years of ranch work and law enforcement. Need a lift? He asked. I can manage, Chloe said, her independence bristling. She pushed up, water cascading off her. Unfortunately, the concrete was wet. Her hand slipped. For the second time in 10 minutes, gravity made a mockery of Chloe Donovan. She pitched forward, not back into the water, but onto the deck, sliding straight toward Luke's shins. Luke reacted with the reflexes that made him an excellent sheriff. He didn't step back. He reached out. He caught her by the upper arms just as she collided with him, hauling her upright and against his chest to keep her from face-planting onto the concrete. The impact knocked the wind out of both of them. Suddenly, Chloe was pressed flush against the polyester uniform of the Hot Springs County Sheriff. She could feel the hard wall of his chest, the warmth radiating off him, and the solid thump of his heart beneath the badge. He didn't smell like dust anymore. He smelled like clean cotton, gun oil, and something spicy and uniquely male. Luke's hands were gripping her bare arms, his fingers searing against her cool, wet skin. His internal monologue had stopped arguing and had gone completely silent, stunned by the sensory overload. She was soft where he was hard, wet where he was dry, and she looked up at him with wide, startled green eyes that seemed to swallow him whole. Let go, his brain commanded. Negative, his hands replied. Holding pattern initiated. You okay? His voice came out rougher than intended, a gravelly sound that vibrated against her chest. Chloe blinked, water dripping from her eyelashes onto his shirt. She saw the pulse jumping in his jaw. She saw the way his pupils had dilated, swallowing the brown irises. For a split second, she thought he might kiss her. The thought was terrifying. The thought was electric. I got the deck wet, she whispered, a truly stupid thing to say. Yeah, Luke murmured, his gaze dropping to her mouth before snapping back up to her eyes. You did. From the chaise lounge, Mark's voice shattered the moment like a brick through a window. If you two are done dancing, the beer is getting warm. And Luke, you're getting wet? That's government property you're ruining. Luke released her as if she were made of burning coal. He took a step back, adjusting his belt, his face flushing a dark red that had nothing to do with the Wyoming heat. Right, Luke said, clearing his throat. He looked everywhere except at Chloe's bikini. Right, Mark, beer. Chloe wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling very naked despite the summer heat. A shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature rattled down her spine. She watched Luke walk toward her brother, his gait stiff and uncharacteristically awkward. She turned back to the pool. Trixie the Triceratops bobbed gently in the ripples, looking smug. "Shut up," Chloe whispered to the dinosaur. She had come home to Thermopolis to lick her wounds, to hide in the comforting boredom of her childhood town where nothing ever changed. She had expected dinosaur museums, sulfur smells, and bingo nights at the community center. She had not expected to feel a jolt of electricity strong enough to jumpstart a pickup truck just by touching Luke Buchanan. Chloe grabbed her towel and scrubbed it over her face, hiding her own blush. This was going to be a problem. A complication. Her life was currently a non-linear mess of divorce papers and moving boxes. She didn't have room for a complication with broad shoulders and a badge. But as she peeked over the towel, she saw Luke twist the cap off a beer, throw his head back, and laugh at something Mark said. The sound was rich and genuine, and it made her stomach do a traitorous little flip. She wasn't just in the deep end of the pool anymore. She was in deep trouble. "Hey, Chloe!" Mark yelled, waving a bottle. "Luke says he can arrest the dinosaur if you want to press charges." Chloe dropped the towel to her shoulders and forced a dazzling, sarcastic smile that didn't quite reach her panic-stricken eyes. "Tell the sheriff I'll handle my own battles," she called back. She walked toward them, leaving wet footprints on the hot concrete, unaware that the real battle had only just begun. Chapter 2. The Thermodynamics of Barbecue and Regret. The problem with a small town like Thermopolis was not the lack of anonymity, nor was it the pervasive scent of sulfur that occasionally drifted from the Bighorn River like a dragon with digestive issues. The problem, Chloe decided as she wrapped a towel around her waist with the precision of a bomb disposal technician, was the memory, specifically the collective memory of the population. In a city, you could reinvent yourself. You could be Chloe the sophisticated divorcee or Chloe the mystery woman in aisle 4. In Thermopolis, you were simply Chloe Donovan, who once got her braces stuck on a soccer net in 8th grade. Luke Buchanan knew about the soccer net. He had been the one to cut her free with a pocket knife, while Mark laughed so hard he fell off the bench. Now Luke was sitting in a mesh lawn chair, his uniform pants straining slightly against his thighs as he nursed a bottle of Coors Light. He looked entirely too comfortable for a man wearing 20 pounds of law enforcement gear in 90-degree heat. Mark flipped a steak on the massive stainless steel grill, a plume of smoke rising to join the heat haze. "So, Chloe," Mark said, wielding the tongs like a scepter. "Luke was just telling me about the vandalism down at the dinosaur center. Kids painting toenail polish on the Jimbo the Supersaurus exhibit. You remember Jimbo?" "Hard to forget," Chloe said, squeezing water from her hair. "He's 100 feet long." "Technically 106, Luke corrected automatically. He took a sip of beer, his eyes tracking a droplet of water that was making a treacherous journey from Chloe's collarbone down toward the valley of her bikini top. Luke's brain was currently engaged in a civil war. The logical hemisphere was shouting about the bro code, specifically Article 4, Section 2, "Thou shalt not covet thy best friend's little sister, especially when said friend is holding a sharp grilling implement." The primitive hemisphere, however, was banging rocks together and chanting about how the little sister had grown up to be a smoke show. He forced his gaze to the horizon, where the red sandstone of the Owl Creek Mountains burned crimson in the late afternoon sun. He needed a distraction. He needed a cold shower. He needed to leave, but the steak smelled too good, and his legs seemed to have forgotten how to work. "Anyway," Mark continued, oblivious to the fact that the air between his sister and his best friend was thick enough to chew, "I told Luke you might be looking for work, since you have that degree in, what was it, old stuff?" "Anthropology," Chloe corrected, shivering despite the heat. "And I have a minor in museum studies." "Right, old stuff. They need a tour guide at the dig sites. Pays peanuts, but you get to play in the dirt." "Just like when you were 5. Mark grinned. "Remember when you tried to dig to China in the backyard and hit the septic tank instead?" Chloe closed her eyes. "I hate you." "Love you too, sis. Go put some clothes on. We're eating in 10. Chloe turned and marched toward the sliding glass doors, her dignity held together by wet terry cloth and sheer willpower. As she slid the door shut, she felt Luke's eyes on her back. It felt like a physical touch, a warm hand between her shoulder blades that made her knees go weak. She leaned against the cool granite of the kitchen island and exhaled a shaky breath. This was a disaster. She was supposed to be mourning the death of her marriage, not developing a cardiac arrhythmia every time the local sheriff took off his sunglasses. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Luke was Mark's friend. He was the furniture of her childhood. Sturdy, reliable, and always there. The memories hit her then, disjointed and non-linear, like a slideshow where someone had dropped the carousel. 7 years ago, the Wyoming winter was particularly cruel that year. The wind howled down the canyon, turning the roads into sheets of black ice. Chloe was 20, home from college for Christmas break, and she was currently sitting in the passenger seat of Luke's beat-up Ford pickup truck, sobbing so hard she was fogging up the windows. She had just been dumped by a guy named Todd who played acoustic guitar and wore beanies in August. Todd had told her she was too intense and that he needed to explore his spiritual center, which apparently involved sleeping with a barista named Rain. Luke drove in silence, the heater blasting, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He wasn't a sheriff then, just a deputy, but he already had that aura of command. "He's an idiot, Chloe," Luke said, his voice low over the hum of the tires. "He's a poet," Chloe wailed, clutching a wad of tissues. "He has a soul. He has a goatee and a fear of commitment," Luke countered. He pulled the truck over at the scenic overlook above the hot springs. Steam rose from the mineral pools below, ghostly white against the snow. Luke shifted the truck into park and turned to her. In the dim light of the dashboard, his face was all angles and shadows. He reached out and awkwardly patted her shoulder. It was a brotherly pat. "Look," Luke said, struggling for the right words. You're smart. You're funny. You know the difference between a Jurassic and a Cretaceous formation." "Triassic?" she sniffled. "Exactly. Todd wouldn't know a dinosaur if it bit him in the ass. You need a man, Chloe. Not a boy who thinks wondering where his next bong hit is coming from constitutes a spiritual journey." Chloe had looked up at him then, her eyes red and puffy. "You think I'm smart?" "I think you're brilliant," Luke said firmly, "and terrifying. Now stop crying or I'm going to have to arrest Todd for emotional distress. And the paperwork is a nightmare." She had laughed then, a watery, hiccuping sound. Luke had smiled, that rare, lopsided grin that made him look younger, and for a second, the air in the cab had felt charged. But then he had reached into the back seat, grabbed a bag of beef jerky, and offered her a piece, like one would offer a treat to a sad golden retriever. The moment passed, filed away under Big Brother's friend. Present-day Chloe shook the memory away. She wasn't 20 anymore, and she certainly wasn't crying over Todd or Brad or anyone else. She marched to her bedroom, pulling on a pair of denim shorts and a loose white tank top. She ran a brush through her damp hair, applied a layer of lip balm as if it were war paint, and returned to the patio. The steaks were done. Mark had piled them onto a platter, the meat glistening with juice. He had also set the table, which in Mark's world meant throwing a roll of paper towels in the center and putting out 3 forks. "Grub's up," Mark announced. "Luke, grab the potato salad from the cooler. Mom made it before she left for bingo. It has the weird pickles in it." They sat around the wrought iron table. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the red dirt. The air was cooling, but the heat between Chloe and Luke seemed to have its own internal thermostat that was stuck on broil. "So," Luke said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision, "how long are you back for?" Chloe stabbed a potato. "Indefinitely. Until I figure out what I want to be when I grow up." "You're 27, Mark pointed out, chewing with his mouth open. "You're grown." "I'm resetting," Chloe said defensively. "Brad got the condo, the dog, and the espresso machine. I got the Honda and my freedom. I think I won, but the Honda needs a new transmission, so the jury is out." Luke looked up, his brow furrowing. "He kept the dog?" "Buster liked him better," Chloe admitted, poking at a pickle. "Brad fed him filet mignon scraps. I fed him kibble. I couldn't compete with bribery." "Guy sounds like a piece of work," Luke grumbled. A surge of protective anger flared in his chest, hot, sudden, and irrational. He imagined a faceless man in a polo shirt and wanted to introduce him to the Wyoming Penal Code. "He was just organized," Chloe said. "He had a spreadsheet for our vacation days. He scheduled intimacy for Thursday nights at 9:15 after this old house." Mark choked on his beer. He coughed violently, pounding his chest. "Thursday? At 9:15? That's clinical." Luke set his knife down, his appetite suddenly gone. The thought of anyone scheduling intimacy with Chloe, of reducing the vibrant, chaotic, beautiful woman across from him to a calendar slot, made his blood boil. And the thought of her actually being with another man, well, that was a road his mind refused to travel down without blowing a tire. "You deserve better than a spreadsheet, Chloe," Luke said. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that silenced the table. Chloe looked up, startled. Their eyes met across the centerpiece of paper towels. Luke's brown eyes were dark, intense, and entirely devoid of brotherly affection. For a moment, the sounds of the cicadas and the distant rush of the river faded away. "I know," she whispered. Mark looked between them, his eyes narrowing. He was dense, but he wasn't blind. He cleared his throat loudly. "Well, this got heavy. Who wants pie? I bought a frozen apple pie. It might still be frozen in the middle, but that adds texture." Mark stood up, scraping his chair back. "I'll go get it. You two talk about dinosaurs or crime or whatever." He vanished into the house, leaving a wake of awkward silence behind him. Chloe swirled her fork in the remains of her potato salad. "You don't have to be nice to me, Luke. I know I'm a mess right now." "I'm not being nice," Luke said. "I'm being honest. There's a difference." He watched her hands. They were small, capable hands, currently trembling slightly. He wanted to reach across the table and cover them with his own. He wanted to tell her that she looked beautiful in that simple white top, even with her hair damp and no makeup on. He wanted to tell her that he had kept that sketch she drew of him in high school, tucked away in an old shoebox, though he'd never admit he knew she drew it. "I felt like an idiot in the pool," she admitted, breaking the silence. "I wanted to come back here and be successful, impressive. Instead, I'm wrestling pool toys and moving back into my childhood bedroom." "There's no shame in regrouping," Luke said. He leaned back, the plastic chair creaking under his frame. "And for the record, you were winning against the Triceratops until gravity got involved." Chloe laughed, a genuine sound that made Luke's chest ache. "You're a terrible liar, Sheriff." "It's part of the job description." He stood up and began clearing the plates. It was an instinctual move to do something with his hands other than reach for her. Chloe stood up too, grabbing the salad bowl. "I've got it," she said. "I'll help." They moved toward the kitchen door at the same time. The doorway was wide enough for two people, provided those two people weren't hyper-aware of each other's personal space. Chloe moved left. Luke moved left. They did the awkward two-step shuffle of people trying to be polite. "Sorry," Chloe said, stepping right. "My bad," Luke said, stepping right. They collided. It wasn't the dramatic full-body impact of the pool deck, but a softer, more insidious brush of contact. Luke's arm grazed hers. His hip bumped her hip. The static electricity was palpable. He caught her elbow to steady her, his fingers wrapping around the warm skin. He didn't let go immediately. He looked down at her, and she looked up, her lips parted slightly in surprise. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the light from the patio and the glow of the oven clock. The smell of sagebrush and cooling asphalt drifted in from outside. Luke's internal monologue was screaming, "Kiss her. Just do it. Mark is wrestling a frozen pie. You have 30 seconds." Chloe's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw the intent in his eyes. This wasn't the boy who dunked her pigtails. This was a man who knew exactly what he wanted, and for the first time in her life she realized he might want her. "Luke," she breathed, his name feeling heavy on her tongue. He leaned in, just an inch. The scent of him, soap, man, and the faint smoky tang of the barbecue filled her senses. "Chloe," he murmured, his voice rough. I can't find the pie server," Mark bellowed from the living room, his voice echoing like a foghorn in a library. "Did we even own a pie server? Do we just use a shovel?" The moment shattered into a million jagged pieces. Luke jerked back as if he'd been tased. He released her elbow and took a wide step backward, nearly tripping over the doorframe. He ran a hand through his hair, looking flustered and guilty. I should go help him," Luke stammered, "before he uses a socket wrench." "Yeah," Chloe said, her voice sounding thin and breathless. "Yeah, good idea. Safety first." Luke fled into the house, leaving Chloe standing alone in the doorway, holding a bowl of potato salad like it was the Holy Grail. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the sliding door. She was in trouble. Serious, catastrophic, Class A felony trouble. She had come home to find herself. Instead, she had found Luke Buchanan, and she had a terrible feeling that he was going to be much harder to get over than a husband who alphabetized his spice rack. Inside the kitchen, she heard Mark ask, Why is your face red? Did you eat a hot pepper? It's the heat, Mark, Luke's voice replied, sounding strained. Just the heat. Chloe looked out at the purple Triceratops floating in the darkening pool. Don't say a word, she whispered to the dinosaur. Not one word. Chapter 3. The Fossilization of Dignity. The morning sun hit Thermopolis with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, bouncing off the red rock canyon walls and drilling directly into Chloe Donovan's bedroom window. She groaned, pulling the pillow over her head. The pillow smelled like lavender in her teenage years, specifically the body spray she had marinated in during 2008. Down the hall, the sound of a blender attempting to pulverize gravel, or perhaps just Mark's morning kale, vibrated through the floorboards. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut. The previous night's kitchen encounter with Luke Buchanan was currently replaying in her mind on a loop, in high definition, with surround sound. He almost kissed me. The thought caused a pleasant, terrifying flip in her stomach. He ran away because Mark was looking for a pie server. The thought caused a distinct wave of humiliation. Chloe kicked off the sheets. She was a grown woman. She was divorced. She had a degree. She could handle a little awkward sexual tension with her brother's best friend. She just needed coffee, a shower, and perhaps a disguise. In the kitchen, Mark was leaning against the counter, drinking a sludge-colored liquid from a mason jar. He looked entirely too cheerful for 8 a.m. "Morning, sunshine," Mark chirped. "You look like you wrestled the Triceratops again and lost." "I hate you," Chloe grumbled, reaching for the coffee pot. "And I hate that blender." "It's a nutrient extraction system," Mark corrected. "Luke's meeting me at the gun range later. You want to come? You can shoot things. It's therapeutic. Imagine the target is Brad's spice rack." At the mention of Luke, Chloe's hand spasmed, splashing hot coffee onto the counter. Mark watched the brown puddle spread. "You're twitchy. Is this about the pie server incident?" "Because I found it, by the way. It was in the tool chest. I used it to mix spackle last winter." "I am not twitchy," Chloe lied, grabbing a paper towel. "I am caffeinating. And I have plans. I'm going to the dinosaur center to beg for a job." "Wear sensible shoes," Mark advised. "And try not to knock over any skeletons. Those things are older than your jokes." 12 years earlier. The parking lot of Hot Springs County High School was empty, save for a rusted blue pickup truck and 3 traffic cones. 15-year-old Chloe sat in the driver's seat, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. In the passenger seat, 21-year-old Luke Buchanan sat with the patience of a saint, eating an apple. "Okay," Luke said, his voice calm. "Ease off the clutch, slowly. Like you're sneaking up on a sleeping cat." "I can't do it," Chloe wailed. "The truck hates me. It wants to stall. It wants to die." "It's a Ford, Chloe. It wants to work. Just breathe." In the back seat, Mark was currently hanging out the window, yelling at invisible pedestrians. "Floor it, Grandma! We're burning daylight!" "Mark, shut up or walk home," Luke said, not even turning his head. He looked back at Chloe. "Ignore him. He's a genetic anomaly. Focus on the tachometer. When it hits 2, shift." Chloe took a deep breath. She let out the clutch. The truck lurched forward, bucked like a bronco, and stalled with a violent shudder that snapped their heads back. Mark cackled. "Whiplash! I'm suing." Chloe dropped her forehead onto the steering wheel, fighting back tears of frustration. She was failing. She was embarrassing herself in front of Luke. Luke sighed, but it wasn't a sigh of annoyance. He opened his door, walked around the front of the truck, and opened her door. "Scoot over," he said. "You're giving up on me," she whispered. "No," Luke said, climbing in and practically sitting on her until she scrambled over the console to the middle seat. "I'm driving us to the Dairy Queen. You need a dipped cone. Sugar stabilizes the nerves. We'll try again in 20 minutes. He put the truck in gear, his arm brushing against her shoulder. He smelled like axle grease and rain. "You'll get it, Chloe. You're a Donovan. You're stubborn. It just takes time." She had looked up at his profile, the strong jaw, the easy focus on the road, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the heater. He was safe. He was the anchor. Present-day the Wyoming Dinosaur Center was a world-class facility tucked into the red hills of Thermopolis, a testament to the fact that Wyoming had once been a tropical paradise before it decided to become a wind tunnel. Chloe stood in the main hall, surrounded by the looming skeletons of creatures that had ruled the earth millions of years ago. She felt a kinship with them. They were exposed, structurally complex, and currently collecting dust. She smoothed the front of her linen blouse. She had come to ask Dr. Lena Vogel for a job. Lena was a brilliant paleontologist who ran the center with an iron fist and a deep suspicion of anyone who didn't know the difference between a femur and a fibula. Chloe Donovan. A sharp voice echoed from the gallery above. Chloe looked up. Dr. Vogel stood on the mezzanine, looking down like a bird of prey. I heard you were back. Mark told the butcher, who told the postman, who told my receptionist. Small towns, Chloe shouted back, forcing a smile. Faster than fiber optics. Come up, Lena commanded. I have a problem, and you have tiny hands. It might be serendipity. Chloe climbed the stairs, her hopes rising. Tiny hands were useful in excavation. Maybe she'd be dusting a rare Allosaurus skull. However, when she reached the top of the stairs, she didn't find a dig site. She found a crime scene. And she found the sheriff. Luke stood near the railing, notebook in hand, looking at the massive suspended skeleton of a Supersaurus. He was wearing his uniform, the tan shirt stretched tight across his shoulders, his badge catching the overhead lights. He looked up as she approached. For a second, the professional mask slipped. His eyes widened, dark and hungry, before he blinked and the sheriff returned. Chloe, he nodded, his voice dropping an octave. Sheriff? She replied, her breath hitching. Arresting the Bones for loitering? Vandalism, Luke said, gesturing with his pen. Someone broke in last night, climbed the scaffolding, painted the Supersaurus's toenails hot pink. Chloe looked at the massive fossilized foot suspended 10 feet off the ground. Sure enough, the distal phalanges were coated in a neon shade of tickle-me pink. It's actually quite festive, Chloe murmured, then caught Dr. Vogel's glare. I mean tragic. A desecration of history. I need it cleaned, Lena snapped. The solvent is delicate. It requires a gentle touch. My interns are ham-fisted oafs, and I have a tour group of donors arriving in an hour. If they see a drag queen dinosaur, I lose my funding. Lena turned to Luke. Sheriff, hold the ladder. Chloe, here's the solvent and a toothbrush. Get up there. Chloe blinked. Me? I'm wearing linen. You want a job? Lena arched a brow. Prove you can handle a crisis. Or go back to wrestling pool toys. News traveled terrifyingly fast. 5 minutes later, Chloe found herself 20 feet in the air, on a wobbling aluminum extension ladder, clutching a bottle of chemical solvent and a toothbrush. Luke stood at the base of the ladder, his hands gripping the side rails. He was looking up. Directly up. Everything okay up there? Luke called out. Fine, Chloe squeaked, scrubbing at a massive toe bone. Just trying not to think about the fact that if I fall, I'll be impaled on a rib cage. I won't let you fall, Luke said. The conviction in his voice made her pause. She looked down. It was a mistake. From this angle, she had a perfect view of Luke's upturned face. She also realized that from his angle, he had a perfect view of, well, everything. Don't look up, Chloe shrieked, clutching the fossil. I have to look up to spot you, Luke argued, though he dutifully stared at his own boots. His ears were turning a fascinating shade of crimson. Just scrub the toe, Chloe. I am scrubbing. It's durable polish, probably gel. Who gives a dinosaur a gel manicure? She leaned further out to reach the pinky toe, or the dinosaur equivalent. The ladder shifted against the slick, polished concrete floor. Whoa, Luke barked, bracing his weight against the bottom rung. Center of gravity, Chloe. Don't reach. I can almost get it, she grunted. She stretched, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth in concentration. Physics, however, was a cruel mistress. The bottle of solvent, slick with condensation, slipped from her grip. Chloe gasped and lunged to catch it. Her foot slipped off the rung. For a terrifying second, she was weightless. She flailed, grabbing blindly. Her hand closed around a rope that was part of the Supersaurus's suspension cabling. The rope held. The knot securing the excess slack did not. With a sound like a giant zipper unzipping, the coil of rope released. Chloe swung out from the ladder in a wide arc, like Tarzan with a panic disorder. Chloe! Luke roared. He didn't wait. He abandoned the ladder and lunged into her path to break her fall. She didn't fall. She swung. She collided with Luke with the force of a wrecking ball. The impact knocked him off his feet, and they went down in a tangle of limbs, rope, and law enforcement polyester. They slid across the polished floor, coming to a halt beneath the pelvis of the Supersaurus. Silence descended on the hall, broken only by the sound of the solvent bottle rolling away. Clack, clack, clack. Chloe lay sprawled on top of Luke. Her face was buried in his neck. His arms were wrapped tightly around her waist, instinctively protecting her head. She froze. She could feel his heart hammering against her chest like a jackhammer. She could feel the hard lines of his body beneath her. Her leg was wedged between his thighs in a way that was entirely inappropriate for a public building. "Are you hurt?" Luke groaned, his voice vibrating against her ear. Chloe lifted her head. They were inches apart. His aviator sunglasses had been knocked askew, revealing eyes that were wide with shock and something much darker. "No," she whispered. "I think you broke my fall. And possibly your spleen." Luke didn't let go. If anything, his grip tightened. "I'm fine." He wasn't fine. Luke Buchanan was currently in a state of catastrophic sensory overload. Every logic circuit in his brain had shorted out. All he knew was that Chloe was in his arms, she was soft, she smelled like vanilla coffee, and he never wanted to move. "We should get up," Chloe said, making no move to get up. "Yeah," Luke breathed. His gaze dropped to her lips. The air between them crackled. It was the kitchen, all over again, but this time there was no Mark, no pie server, just the silent judgment of a prehistoric reptile. Luke's hand moved, sliding up her back to cup her neck. His thumb brushed the sensitive skin behind her ear. Chloe shivered, a small, involuntary sound escaping her throat. "Chloe," he murmured, and the way he said her name, like it was a prayer or a confession, made her knees turn to water, which was inconvenient since she was already horizontal. He lifted his head. She lowered hers. The gap closed. "Well," Dr. Vogel's voice boomed from the balcony, echoing like the voice of God. "I see the bonding exercise is going well." Chloe scrambled off Luke as if he were radioactive. She slipped on the slick floor, windmilled her arms, and barely managed to stay upright. Luke sat up, adjusting his uniform with frantic, jerky movements. He grabbed his sunglasses and jammed them onto his face, probably to hide the fact that he looked like a man who had just been dragged behind a horse and enjoyed it. "Dr. Vogel." Luke stood up, his voice cracking before he cleared his throat and dropped it into his sheriff register. "Accident. Ladder malfunction. Investigating the physics of the fall." Lena Vogel descended the stairs slowly, her heels clicking ominously. She looked at the rope dangling from the ceiling. She looked at the solvent puddle. She looked at Chloe's flushed face and Luke's disheveled uniform. "The toe is still pink," Lena observed dryly. "I was getting to it," Chloe squeaked, trying to smooth her hair and realizing she had a smudge of dinosaur dust on her nose. "You're hired," Lena said. Chloe blinked. "I am? You have excellent reflexes, and you didn't break the skeleton. Also, the sheriff looks like he's about to have a coronary event, and I find that entertaining. You start Monday. Minimum wage. Don't touch the T-Rex." Lena turned on her heel and marched back to her office. "Sheriff, clean up your mess." Luke and Chloe stood alone under the Supersaurus. The silence was thick, heavy, and smelled faintly of chemical solvent. "So," Chloe said, staring at a femur. "I got the job." "Congratulations," Luke said. He picked up his hat from the floor and dusted it off. He wouldn't look at her. He couldn't. If he looked at her now, with her hair messy and her lips swollen from where she'd bitten them, he was going to do something that would get him fired, arrested, or killed by Mark. "Luke," Chloe stepped closer. "About just now." "Hazard of the job," Luke said quickly, too quickly. "Public safety, serve and protect." "You protected me," she said softly. He finally looked at her. The lenses of his aviators reflected her own face back at her, wide-eyed and confused. "Always, Chloe," he said, his voice rough. "That's the deal. I'm the safety net." He turned and walked toward the exit, his boots echoing on the concrete. "I'll tell Mark you're alive. Drive safe, watch out for ladders." Chloe watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of elation and frustration. He was the safety net. That was the problem. Safety nets were there to catch you when you fell, but they weren't supposed to catch you and then kiss you senseless on the museum floor. She looked up at the Supersaurus. The pink toenail gleamed mockingly in the spotlight. "Shut up," she told the dinosaur. She grabbed the ladder. She had a toe to scrub and a sheriff to figure out. And, frankly, she wasn't sure which one was going to require more elbow grease. As she climbed back up, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Mark. "Mark, Luke just texted me that he thinks he pulled a hamstring at the museum. Did you tackle him? Also, Mom wants to know if you want meatloaf for dinner." Chloe rested her forehead against the cold aluminum rung and laughed. It was a shaky sound, but it was real. She was home. She had a job, and she had a complication that was 6'3" and wore a badge. The Fichtean curve of her life was spiking, and Chloe had a feeling the ride was just getting started. But first, she had to erase a pedicure from the Cretaceous period. Chapter 4: The Tensile Strength of Nylon and Resolve. If there was one thing the universe enjoyed more than watching Chloe Donovan wrestle inflatable reptiles, it was watching her attempt to negotiate with mechanical objects. Chloe's 2014 Honda Civic, a vehicle that possessed the reliability of a politician during an election year and the horsepower of a sedated hamster, had decided to stage a protest. It had chosen its location with spiteful precision, exactly 4 miles outside of town on a stretch of highway surrounded by red dirt, sagebrush, and a heat shimmer that distorted the horizon into a funhouse mirror. Steam hissed from under the hood with a sound like a disgruntled tea kettle. Chloe stood on the side of the road, staring at the engine block. She was wearing her sensible work clothes, khaki shorts that were currently riding up in unhelpful ways, and a polo shirt that made her feel like a fast food manager. "You are a traitor," she told the radiator. "We had a deal. I put gas in you. You take me to the grocery store to buy wine. This is a breach of contract." The car did not reply. It simply vomited a little more green coolant onto the asphalt. Chloe sighed and leaned back against the scorching metal of the door. She checked her phone. No signal, of course. In the digital age, Wyoming was still largely a dead zone, a place where cell towers feared to tread. She had 2 options. Option A, start walking and hope a serial killer didn't pick her up. Option B, wait for a good Samaritan. In Thermopolis, Good Samaritan usually meant someone you went to kindergarten with, who would remind you of the time you ate paste. She didn't have to wait long. Within 10 minutes, a vehicle appeared in the distance. It wasn't just any vehicle. It was a Hot Springs County Sheriff's Cruiser, the lights bar flashing unnecessarily as it pulled onto the shoulder behind her. Chloe groaned and dropped her head into her hands. Of course, it couldn't have been a tourist from Iowa. It had to be the law. Luke Buchanan stepped out of the cruiser. He was wearing his sunglasses again, and the tight tan uniform that should have been illegal for causing distracted driving accidents. He didn't look annoyed. He looked resigned, like a man who had accepted that his karma involved rescuing Donovans from their own poor life choices. He walked over, boots crunching on the gravel, and peered at the steaming Honda. "License and registration." He deadpanned. "I'm going to throw a lug nut at you," Chloe threatened without lifting her head. "Assaulting an officer. That's a felony. I'd have to handcuff you." Luke's internal monologue immediately betrayed him. "Handcuffs." Chloe. The back of the cruiser. His brain helpfully provided a vivid, high-definition image of that scenario, which caused his blood pressure to spike dangerously. He shoved the thought into a mental box labeled "Do Not Open" and slammed the lid. "What happened?" Luke asked, leaning over the engine. "I think it died of a broken heart," Chloe said, fanning herself with a map she had dug out of the glove box. "Or the transmission. It made a sound like a blender eating a spoon, and then it just stopped." Luke poked at a hose. "Radiator hose blew. Engine overheated. You cooked it, Chloe." "I didn't cook it. It cooked itself. It's a suicide." Luke straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. The movement caused his biceps to flex, a detail Chloe's eyes tracked with pathetic eagerness. She hated herself a little bit. Here she was, stranded in 90-degree heat with a dead car, and her primary concern was how good her brother's best friend looked in polyester. "I can call a tow," Luke said, "but the reception out here is spotty. I might have to drive you up to the ridge to get a signal." "Fine," Chloe said, grabbing her purse. "But if you make a joke about women drivers, I'm walking." "I wouldn't dream of it," Luke lied. "Get in the truck. It's 100 degrees out here, and you're starting to turn the color of a tomato." 10 years ago, the gymnasium of Hot Springs County High smelled like desperation, cheap cologne, and spiked punch. It was senior prom, and 17-year-old Chloe was hiding under the bleachers. She was wearing a dress that had cost 3 months of babysitting money, a shimmering teal thing that made her feel like a mermaid. Currently, however, the mermaid was crying so hard she was creating her own ocean. Her date, a basketball player named Travis who had hair like a golden retriever and the IQ to match, had vanished. She had found him 20 minutes ago in the parking lot, making out with a sophomore named Clumsy. Chloe hugged her knees to her chest, trying to stifle her hiccups. She just wanted to go home. She wanted to burn the dress. She wanted to move to Antarctica, where there were no boys, only penguins. A pair of heavy work boots stopped in front of her hiding spot. "You plan on living down here?" a familiar voice asked. "Because the janitor sweeps on Mondays, and he's not gentle." Chloe looked up. Luke was 23 then, already working as a deputy. He was technically chaperoning, which mostly involved standing by the punch bowl and looking intimidating to keep the underclassmen from spiking it. "Go away," Chloe sniffled. "Dwelling." Luke crouched down. He looked ridiculous in a suit, too broad, too uncomfortable, but his eyes were kind. "Travis is an idiot, Chloe. Mark is currently explaining that to him near the equipment shed. I think Travis is going to have a hard time sitting down for a week." "Everyone saw," she whispered. "I look stupid." "You look beautiful," Luke said. He didn't say it like a compliment, he said it like a fact, like stating the sky was blue. "And Travis looks like a guy who just fumbled the ball on the 1-yard line." He held out a hand. "Come on, I'm off duty in 10 minutes. I know a place that serves milkshakes at midnight. My treat, no crying allowed." She had taken his hand. He had pulled her out from the dusty dark, dusted off her teal skirt, and offered her his suit jacket because she was shivering. It was huge on her, swallowing her whole, and it smelled like him. Safe. Solid. He drove her to the diner, bought her a chocolate shake, and listened to her rant about men for an hour. He never hit on her. He never looked at her the way he looked at women his own age. He was just Luke, the protector, the barrier between her and the cruelties of the world. Present day, the interior of Luke's patrol SUV was aggressively air-conditioned. It smelled of coffee and that unique scent of law enforcement, sanitized vinyl and authority. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, hugging her purse. The silence was thick, but it wasn't the comfortable silence of 10 years ago. This silence had teeth. Luke put the truck in gear and pulled onto the road. He didn't head toward town. He headed up a gravel access road that wound toward the top of the canyon rim. "Where are we going?" Chloe asked. "This isn't the way to the impound lot." "Signal is better up top," Luke grunted. "And I need to check the perimeter of the reservoir anyway. 2 birds." The truck bounced over ruts. Chloe watched his hands on the wheel. He drove with a casual competence that was annoying. Brad used to drive with both hands at 10 and 2, knuckles white, gasping every time a squirrel looked like it might cross the street. Luke drove like the vehicle was an extension of his body. "So," Luke said, breaking the silence, "how's the bones scrubbing?" "Glamorous," Chloe said. "Dr. Vogel told me today that I have. Excellent focus for a millennial." I think it was a compliment, but she said it while holding a pickaxe, so I wasn't sure. "Vogel likes you. She doesn't let just anyone touch the Supersaurus. That's her baby. She told me if I scratch it, she'll bury me in the Morrison formation." Luke chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated in the small cab. "She would too. She knows where all the holes are dug." They reached the top of the ridge. The view was spectacular. Miles of red rock canyons, the winding ribbon of the Bighorn River, and the distant blue of the mountains. But neither of them was looking at the scenery. Luke put the truck in park but left the engine running. He pulled out his phone. "1 bar," he muttered. "Hold on." He unbuckled his seatbelt and shifted, turning his body toward her to get a better angle at the window. The movement brought his shoulder within inches of hers. Chloe stopped breathing. The air in the cab suddenly felt very thin. Luke froze. He seemed to realize his proximity at the same moment she did. He looked down at her. The sunglasses hid his eyes, but the tension in his jaw was visible. "Your hair is different," he said. The words seemed to fall out of his mouth without permission. Chloe self-consciously touched a strand of her dark waves. "It's humid. It does things." "I like it," Luke said. His voice was rough, gravelly. "I liked it when you were a kid, too. Pigtails. You looked like a menace." "I was a menace," Chloe whispered. "I still am." "Yeah," Luke murmured. "You are." He took off his sunglasses. His brown eyes were dark, dilated, and fixed on her mouth. The air conditioning was blasting, but Chloe felt like she was sitting inside a furnace. "Do it," she thought. "Just kiss me. Ruin our friendship. Ruin my brother's life. Just do it." Luke leaned in, his hand lifted, hovering near her face, as if he wanted to touch her cheek but was afraid she might burn him. And then, the radio on his dashboard squawked with a volume that could wake the dead. "Sheriff Buchanan, this is dispatch. We have a 1046 situation on Broadway. Repeat, 10 to 46. Luke slammed back into his seat so hard the leather creaked. He grabbed the radio mic, his face flushing a dark, angry red. "Buchanan here," he snapped. What is the nature of the 46, dispatch? It's Mrs. Higgins, Sheriff. She says a raccoon has entered her kitchen and is eating her Pillsbury Doughboy collection. She is armed with a broom and is requesting backup. Chloe bit her lip. She bit it hard. She looked out the window, her shoulders shaking. Luke stared at the dashboard. He took a long, slow breath through his nose. He looked like a man who was seriously considering quitting his job to become a monk. Copy that, dispatch, Luke said, his voice flat. Tell Mrs. Higgins to stand down. I'm en route. ETA, 10 minutes. He hung up the mic and looked at Chloe. A raccoon, he said. The doughboy is defenseless, Chloe managed to choke out, tears of laughter leaking from her eyes. He's made of dough, Luke. It's a massacre. It's not funny, Luke growled, though the corner of his mouth twitched. Those collectibles are expensive. He put the truck in gear and spun it around, gravel spraying. I'll drop you at Mark's, he said, the professional mask slamming back into place. I'll call the tow truck on the way. Don't go back to your car. Yes, Sheriff, Chloe said. The drive down the mountain was fast. Luke focused entirely on the road, his knuckles white on the wheel. But the electricity hadn't dissipated. It was just trapped in the cab with them, bouncing off the windows like a trapped bird. They pulled into Mark's driveway 10 minutes later. Mark was on the front porch, watering a cactus with a garden hose. He looked up as the cruiser skidded to a halt. Luke leaned across Chloe to open her door. For 1 second, he was close again. He smelled like rain and repressed urges. Stay out of trouble, Chloe, he whispered near her ear. You're the one chasing raccoons, she whispered back. Luke pulled back, gave her a look that made her toes curl, and then looked at Mark. Mark! Luke yelled out the window. Your sister's car is dead on Highway 20. Go get it. I have a felony burglary in progress involving a pastry mascot. You have a what? Mark yelled back, spraying the porch railing by accident. Don't ask, Luke roared. He hit the gas, and the SUV peeled out of the driveway, leaving a cloud of dust and sexual frustration in its wake. Chloe stood in the driveway, watching him go. Her heart was pounding a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like more, more, more. Mark walked down the steps, trailing the hose. Did he say pastry mascot? Is that code for drugs? No, Chloe said, staring at the dust cloud. It's code for Luke needs a vacation. Well, hop in the truck, Mark said, tossing the hose aside. We gotta go rescue the Honda. I brought a tow strap. And I bought you a helmet. A helmet? Chloe blinked, turning to her brother. Why? Because I'm towing you. Mark grinned, the devilish grin of a big brother who has been waiting for this moment. And the Honda doesn't have power steering when the engine is off? It's gonna be like Mario Kart, Chloe. But with real consequences. Chloe looked at the sky. I should have stayed in the patrol car. Too late. Put the helmet on. It has flames on it. As they drove out to retrieve her car, Chloe couldn't help but feel that her life had become a series of precarious situations. She was being towed by her brother, she was lusting after the sheriff, and she was pretty sure the entire town of Thermopolis was watching and taking bets on which disaster would strike next. But as she clutched the steering wheel of her dead Honda, watching Mark's truck bounce ahead of her, she touched her cheek where Luke's hand had almost rested. The car might be broken, but for the first time in 3 years, Chloe felt like her engine was finally starting to turn over. She just hoped she didn't crash before she figured out where the road was going. Brake, Chloe, brake! Mark's voice crackled over the walkie-talkie he had thrown into her passenger seat. Chloe slammed on the brakes, jerking forward against her seatbelt as the tow strap went slack. I hate you, she screamed into the radio. Love you too, Mark replied cheerfully. Next stop, the auto shop. And then tequila. You look like you need it. You have no idea, she muttered. She needed tequila, yes, but mostly she needed to know what would have happened if Mrs. Higgins's raccoon hadn't chosen that exact moment to commit a felony. And she had a sinking feeling she was going to find out, sooner rather than later. Chapter 5. The Velocity of Gossip and Tequila. Being towed behind a pickup truck while wearing a helmet decorated with realistic flames offers a person a lot of time for introspection. Mostly, Chloe Donovan used this time to contemplate the specific physics of humiliation and whether it was possible to die from it. Mark, enjoying himself entirely too much, took the corner onto Broadway with a gusto that tested the tensile strength of the nylon toe strap. Chloe slammed on her brakes, the dead Honda Civic jerking like a startled mule, her head bobbling under the weight of the helmet. Inside the lead truck, Mark checked his rearview mirror and chuckled. He loved his sister, but seeing her look like a grumpy bobblehead was the highlight of his week. He picked up the walkie-talkie. "Easy back there, Speed Racer," Mark radioed. "We're approaching Earl's Auto. Try not to run into the back of my truck. The paint is new." "I hope you get a flat tire," Chloe's voice crackled back, tinny and full of static. They coasted into the gravel lot of Earl's Auto and Bait Shop, a uniquely Wyoming establishment where one could get a transmission rebuilt and buy a bucket of night crawlers in a single transaction. Chloe climbed out of the Civic, ripping the helmet off her head. Her hair, which had been suffering from the humidity, was now flattened against her skull in a shape that could only be described as, quote, helmet chic. "You did great," Mark said, hopping down from his truck. "Form was a solid 8 out of 10. "I have whiplash," Chloe deadpanned, rubbing her neck. "And I think my dignity fell out somewhere near the stoplight on 6th Street. Earl, a man whose coveralls were more grease than fabric, emerged from the garage wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at the steaming Honda, then at Chloe, then at the flame-decaled helmet in her hand. "Thermostat?" Earl guessed. "Suicide." Chloe corrected. It chose death over another mile in this heat. As they haggled over the price of a diagnostic check, which Earl claimed involved a complex computer system but mostly involved him hitting things with a wrench, the distinctive roar of a police interceptor engine cut through the afternoon air. Chloe stiffened. Her internal radar, recently recalibrated to a frequency known as Sheriff Buchanan, began to ping wildly. Luke's cruiser pulled into the lot, kicking up a small cloud of dust. He parked next to Mark's truck and stepped out. The sunglasses were gone, tucked into his shirt pocket, but the uniform remained, looking crisp despite the fact that he had allegedly just battled a raccoon. He walked toward them, his long strides eating up the distance. He looked tired, the kind of weary that settled in the lines around his eyes, but when his gaze landed on Chloe, something sparked in the brown depths. "Don't look at her mouth," Luke's brain commanded. "Look at the car. Look at Earl. Look at the bucket of worms. Anything but the mouth." He looked at her mouth. "Did you get the perpetrator?" Mark asked, leaning against the fender of his truck. "Mrs. Higgins' kitchen is secure," Luke reported, his voice grave. "The raccoon is in custody. It was apprehended in the pantry, high on sugar and cornered behind a box of Bisquick. It put up a fight." "You have a scratch," Chloe noted, pointing to a thin red line on Luke's forearm. Without thinking, she reached out and touched the skin just below the mark. The contact was electric. Luke flinched, not from pain, but from the sudden jolt of awareness that shot straight from his arm to his groin. Chloe pulled her hand back as if she'd touched a hot stove. "Hazard of the job," Luke said, his voice dropping to that rough register that made Chloe's insides do a complicated gymnastic routine. "Vicious animals, raccoons, especially the carb-loading ones." Earl cleared his throat loudly. "So, about the Honda. It's gonna take a few days. Parts have to come from Billings." "Days?" Chloe groaned. "I'm stranded." "You're not stranded," Mark said, clapping a hand on her shoulder. "You're home, and tonight, we celebrate. Safari Club. Burgers and beers. It's Tuesday, which means it's trivia night. I need a partner who knows useless history facts." "I don't know," Chloe hesitated. The idea of sitting in a dark bar with Luke, trying to pretend she didn't want to lick the salt off his neck, seemed like a terrible idea. "I'm in," Luke said. Chloe's head snapped toward him. "You are?" "I'm off duty in an hour," Luke shrugged, though his internal monologue was currently screaming abort mission. "I need a beer, and I know for a fact Mark thinks the capital of Vermont is maple syrup. He needs help." 8 years ago, the rain in Wyoming didn't just fall, it assaulted the earth. 19-year-old Chloe stood under the awning of the Greyhound station in Casper, shivering violently. Her bag was soaked, her boots were soaked, and her heart was currently bruised and battered. She had come up to surprise a boy she had been seeing at college, only to find him surprising someone else. She had called Mark, but Mark was in Montana on a fishing trip and out of range. She hadn't wanted to call her parents and admit she'd been stupid enough to travel 3 hours for a guy who wore hemp necklaces, so she had called Luke. He arrived 2 hours later in his old pickup. He didn't ask questions. He didn't lecture her about safety or boys or the weather. He simply got out of the truck, took her bag and wrapped her in a blanket he kept behind the seat. The ride back to Thermopolis was quiet. The windshield wipers beat a frantic rhythm against the deluge. "I feel stupid," Chloe whispered into the darkness of the cab. "You're not stupid," Luke said, his eyes on the slick road. "You're optimistic. There's a difference." "He said I was too much," she confessed, pulling the blanket tighter. "Too loud. Too opinionated." Luke's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. A muscle in his jaw jumped. "He's weak," Luke said, his voice low and dangerous. "A man who can't handle a fire shouldn't try to hold a torch, Chloe. Don't you ever dim your light for anyone. You hear me?" He glanced over at her, his expression fierce in the dashboard glow. "You find someone who likes the fire, someone who doesn't need to put it out to feel like a man." Chloe had stared at him, feeling a sudden, strange warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the heater. "Does a guy like that exist?" Luke had looked back at the road, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, he exists." He had reached across the console then, not to hold her hand, but to crank up the radio. Tom Petty filled the cab, drowning out the rain, and Chloe had fallen asleep against the window, safe in the knowledge that Luke Buchanan would always come get her, no matter how hard it was raining. Present day, the Safari Club was a cultural institution in Thermopolis, provided one's definition of culture included taxidermy elk heads wearing sunglasses and a neon sign that buzzed like an angry hornet. The air inside was cool and smelled of fried onions and floor wax. Mark, Chloe, and Luke sat in a circular booth in the back corner. The table was littered with empty baskets of onion rings and condensation-slicked bottles of beer. Mark was currently arguing with the trivia host, a man named Pete who wore a vest with no shirt underneath. "I'm telling you, Pete," Mark shouted over the noise of the jukebox, "the velociraptors in Jurassic Park were actually modeled after Deinonychus. It's a scientific fact. I demand a recount on question 4. "Let it go, Mark," Chloe laughed, sipping her margarita. "You got the question about the Kardashians wrong too. Accept defeat." Luke sat next to Chloe. Close, too close. The booth was designed for intimacy, forcing his thigh to press against hers from hip to knee. Every time he shifted, the friction sent a fresh wave of heat through her body. She was acutely aware of the solid weight of him, the heat radiating through his jeans, the way his arm rested along the back of the booth, his fingers inches from her shoulder. He had changed out of his uniform into a dark blue t-shirt and jeans. The t-shirt fit him in a way that should be illegal, hugging his biceps and chest. Chloe had spent the last hour trying not to stare at his forearms. She was failing. "You okay?" Luke asked, leaning in so she could hear him over the music. His breath ghosted against her ear, warm and smelling of hops. "Fine," Chloe squeaked. She cleared her throat. "Just contemplating the elk. Do you think he knows he's wearing Ray-Bans?" Luke chuckled, the sound vibrating against her side. "That's Earl the elk. He's the longest-serving patron of this bar. He's seen things." Speaking of seeing things, Mark slid back into the booth looking disgruntled. "Pete is a tyrant, but I ordered a round of tequila shots to cleanse the palate of injustice." The waitress arrived with a tray of shots and lime wedges. "To the Honda," Mark toasted, raising his glass. "May it rest in pieces." "To the Honda," Chloe echoed. "To the raccoon," Luke added, clinking his glass against Chloe's. His fingers brushed hers. He didn't pull away. They downed the tequila. The burn was immediate and pleasant. Chloe sucked on a lime wedge, her eyes watering. When she looked up, she caught Luke watching her. His gaze was dark, intense, and focused entirely on her mouth. The air between them seemed to thicken, charging with static. Mark, oblivious, or perhaps playing a very long game, stood up. "I'm going to play Friends in Low Places," Mark announced. "And I'm going to sing it. Prepare yourselves." He wandered off toward the jukebox, leaving Chloe and Luke alone in the booth. The dynamic shifted instantly. Without Mark as a buffer, the tension that had been simmering all day boiled over. "You really okay?" Luke asked again, his voice lower, more intimate. "You seemed quiet during the geography round." "I'm just figuring things out," Chloe said, tracing the rim of her glass. "It's weird being back. Everything is the same, but I'm different." "Different is good," Luke said. "You were always in a hurry to leave, Chloe. Always looking at the horizon. It's nice to see you sitting still for a minute." "I felt like I was suffocating here," she admitted. "But now, I don't know. Maybe I was just suffocating myself." Luke turned his body toward her, boxing her into the corner of the booth. It wasn't threatening. It was enveloping. "You're tough, Chloe. You survived the divorce. You survived the dinosaur polish. You're doing fine." "I don't feel tough," she whispered. "I feel like a mess." "You're not a mess," Luke said firmly. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. The touch was feather-light, but it landed with the impact of a meteor. Chloe's breath hitched. She turned her face into his hand, an instinctual seeking of comfort. Luke's eyes darkened. His internal monologue had stopped shouting warnings and was now simply chanting, "Kiss her, kiss her, kiss her." "Chloe," he murmured. "Well, hello there." The voice broke the moment like a hammer through glass. They sprang apart. Standing at the edge of the table was a man Chloe vaguely recognized from high school. Chad Miller. He was wearing a cowboy hat that was too clean and a shirt with snaps that strained over a beer gut. "Chloe Donovan." Chad grinned, revealing teeth that had seen a lot of chewing tobacco. "Heard you were back on the market. That true?" Chloe blinked, her heart still racing from Luke's touch. "Hi, Chad. I'm back in town, yes?" "Shame about the husband," Chad said, leaning on the table and invading their space. "Some guys don't know what they got. Let me buy you a drink. They got a special on kamikazes." "She's good," Luke said. His voice was calm, but it had a jagged edge to it that Chloe hadn't heard in years. It was the voice he used right before he put someone in handcuffs. Chad looked at Luke, his grin faltering slightly. "Sheriff, didn't see you there in the shadows. Just being friendly." "Be friendly somewhere else, Chad," Luke said. He didn't move, he didn't stand up, but the threat was palpable. He looked like a mountain lion deciding whether or not to swipe a paw. "Right." Chad backed off, holding up his hands. "Just saying hi, no offense." Chad retreated toward the bar. Luke didn't relax. He watched Chad go, his jaw set in a hard line. "You didn't have to do that," Chloe said softly. "I can handle Chad Miller." "I know you can." Luke turned back to her, the anger in his eyes replaced by a simmering intensity. "But I didn't want him buying you a drink. I didn't want him looking at you." "Why?" Chloe challenged, the tequila making her bold. "Why do you care, Luke? You're my brother's friend. You're the safety net. Why does it matter if Chad buys me a kamikaze?" Luke stared at her. The noise of the bar faded away. Friends in low places began to blare from the speakers, and Mark's off-key baritone joined in from across the room. "Because," Luke said, leaning in until his nose almost brushed hers, "I don't want to be the safety net anymore, Chloe. I'm tired of being the guy who drives the truck. I want to be the guy who starts the fire." Chloe's mouth fell open. Her heart stopped, then restarted at double speed. "Luke," she breathed. He looked at her lips. He looked at her eyes. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. "I've wanted to do this since you got out of your car 3 days ago," he muttered. He placed his hand on the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He pulled her toward him. Chloe didn't resist. She leaned in, her eyelids fluttering shut, her hands finding the front of his t-shirt. "Hey guys!" Mark slid into the booth opposite them with the grace of a falling piano, creating a shockwave that rattled the table. "Did you hear me? I crushed that high note! Pete is crying!" Tears of joy, obviously. Luke froze. He closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath that was 90% frustration and 10% homicidal urge. He released Chloe slowly, his hands sliding away from her neck with reluctant slowness. Chloe slumped back against the vinyl, her body humming with unreleased energy. She looked at her brother, who was grinning like a maniac. "You were great, Mark," she said, her voice sounding strangled. "Truly, a revelation." "I know, right?" Mark grabbed a menu. "Now, who wants nachos? All that singing made me hungry." Luke opened his eyes. He looked at Mark. He looked at Chloe. He picked up his empty shot glass and stared at it. "I need another drink," Luke said flatly. "Nachos and shots!" Mark cheered. "Best night ever!" Under the table, Luke's hand found Chloe's knee. He gave it a squeeze. Firm, possessive, and promising. He didn't look at her, but the message was clear. This isn't over. Chloe took a sip of her water to cool down her burning face. No, it definitely wasn't over. In fact, looking at the determined set of Luke Buchanan's jaw, she had a feeling the real trouble was just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, the trouble looked absolutely delicious. Chapter 6. The Kinetic Energy of Taxidermy and Repression. The Wyoming heat had a way of making everything feel heavier. The air, the eyelids, and specifically, the regret of consuming discount tequila on a Tuesday. Chloe Donovan stood on a ladder inside the Wyoming Dinosaur Center, aggressively scrubbing the left tibia of the Supersaurus. She was trying to remove the last of the neon pink nail polish, but the gel was proving to be as stubborn as a mule with a tenure track. Her head throbbed in time with the piped-in atmospheric music, which sounded like a synthesizer having a panic attack in a jungle. But the headache was manageable. What was less manageable was the memory of Luke Buchanan's hand on her knee under the table at the safari club. It hadn't just been a touch, it had been a claim. He wants to start the fire, her brain helpfully replayed for the 400th time since sunrise. Chloe dipped her toothbrush into the solvent. She was a rational woman. She was a woman who organized her books by genre and then by author. She did not have flings with her brother's best friend. That was the plot of a bad paperback novel, the kind with a shirtless cowboy on the cover holding a horse that looked suspiciously sedated. Below her, the heavy metal doors of the exhibit hall clanged open. The sound echoed through the cavernous room like a gunshot, causing Chloe to bobble the solvent bottle. She caught it against her chest, her heart doing a traitorous little flip. She didn't need to look down to know who it was. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop, replaced by a static charge that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Dr. Vogel let me in." Luke's voice floated up from the floor. "She said you were attacking the tibia with unnecessary violence and asked me to intervene before you snapped a million-year-old bone." Chloe looked down. Luke stood directly beneath the ladder, hands on his hips. He was in uniform again, which was unfair. The beige shirt was crisp, the badge caught the light, and his sunglasses were tucked into his pocket. He looked like the cover of Law Enforcement Monthly, if such a magazine existed and catered to women with specific authority fetishes. "I am not violent," Chloe called down, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "I am thorough. There is a difference." "Come down, Chloe," Luke said. "Mark needs us. Mark needs a therapist and a new hobby," she countered, though she began to descend. "What is it this time? Did he accidentally join a cult? Did he buy a emu?" "Worse," Luke said, extending a hand to help her off the last rung. "He went to an estate sale in Meeteetse. When her boots hit the concrete, she didn't let go of his hand immediately. Neither did he. They stood there, the ghosts of the dinosaurs watching them, the air thick with unspoken things. Luke's thumb swept over her knuckles, a rough, calloused caress that sent a shiver straight to her toes. "About last night," Luke started, his voice low. "The tequila," Chloe said quickly, her defense mechanism slamming into place. "It makes everyone affectionate. I once told a lamppost I loved it in college." Luke's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a step closer, invading her personal space in a way that made her breath hitch. "I wasn't drunk, Chloe, and I'm not a lamppost." He was going to kiss her. Right here, in front of a school group that was currently filing into the lobby. She could see the intent in his eyes, a dark, simmering hunger that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. 5 years earlier, the 4th of July in Thermopolis was a serious affair. It involved illegal fireworks, too much potato salad, and the risk of setting the sagebrush on fire. 22-year-old Chloe was sitting on the tailgate of Mark's truck, watching the sky explode in reds and golds. She was wearing cut-off shorts and a bikini top, and she was miserable. She had just graduated college and had no idea what she was doing with her life. Luke had appeared out of the darkness, handing her a cold soda. He leaned against the truck bed next to her, his shoulder brushing hers. "You're brooding," Luke observed. "You're missing the grand finale." Mark strapped 12 Roman candles together. "It's going to be a disaster." "I'm not brooding," Chloe sighed. "I'm contemplating my obsolescence. I have a degree in anthropology. I am qualified to dig holes and talk about dead people. I'm going to end up working at a coffee shop correcting people's pronunciation of espresso." "You're too smart for that," Luke said, taking a sip of his beer. "You'll figure it out, you always do." "You have it all figured out," she said, looking up at him. The fireworks illuminated his profile, strong jaw, stoic expression. "You're a deputy. You have a path. You're steady." Luke looked at her then, and for a second, the mask slipped. He looked at her bare legs, her messy hair, her mouth stained red from a cherry popsicle. He looked like a man starving to death at a banquet he wasn't allowed to attend. Steady is just another word for stuck, Chloe, he muttered. Don't envy it. He had reached out then, as if to touch her face, but stopped himself. He clenched his hand into a fist and dropped it to his side. You're cold, he said abruptly. Here. He stripped off his flannel overshirt and draped it around her shoulders. It smelled like gunpowder and laundry detergent. Keep it. I'm going to go make sure Mark doesn't blow up the county. He had walked away into the smoke, leaving her wrapped in his scent, wondering why safety felt so much like longing. Present day. We have to go, Luke said, stepping back and breaking the spell in the museum. Mark is waiting in the truck. He's vibrating. It's unsettling. Chloe let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Fine. But if I have to bail him out of jail, I'm using his credit card. They walked out into the blinding Wyoming sun. Mark's truck was idling at the curb, the bed covered with a blue tarp that was lumpy and strangely shaped. Get in! Mark yelled through the open window. The eagle has landed! Or rather, the bear has landed. Bear? Chloe asked as she climbed into the middle seat, sandwiched once again between the gear shift and the solid wall of Luke Buchanan. Barnaby, Mark corrected, putting the truck in gear. I bought a taxidermy grizzly bear. He's 8 feet tall, he's majestic, and he was a steal. The previous owner's wife said it was her or the bear. The guy chose the wife. Fool. You bought a dead bear, Luke deadpanned, his thigh pressing against Chloe's as the truck rounded a corner. It's vintage Americana, Mark defended, and I need help getting him into the den. He weighs 400 pounds. He's stuffed with sawdust and lead, apparently. The drive to the ranch was a torture session of proximity. Every bump in the road threw Chloe against Luke. Every turn sent her shoulder into his chest. Luke didn't move away. In fact, he seemed to be taking up more space than usual, his arm draped along the back of the seat, his fingers idly playing with the ends of Chloe's hair where it brushed the upholstery. His internal monologue was a chaotic mess. She smells like vanilla. Stop smelling her. Mark is right there. Mark is singing along to Shania Twain. Focus on the road. Focus on the bear. When they arrived at the ranch, the heat was sweltering. The cicadas were screaming in the cottonwoods. Mark threw off the tarp to reveal Barnaby. Barnaby was, indeed, massive. He was frozen in a terrifying roar, his glass eyes staring accusingly at the horizon. He was also holding a wooden tray, presumably for calling cards or drinks. He's a butler bear, Chloe said, staring at the monstrosity. Mark, this is a crime against nature and interior design. He's distinguished, Mark argued. Now, grab a paw. Luke, you get the base. We have to go through the back door. The front is too narrow. The next 20 minutes were a lesson in physics and perspiration. They managed to wrestle Barnaby off the truck and onto a dolly, but the back porch steps proved to be a formidable adversary. Pivot, Mark yelled, pulling on the bear's ears. Pivot the base! I am pivoting, Luke grunted, lifting the heavy wooden platform. His biceps strained against his sleeves, veins popping in a way that Chloe found incredibly distracting. I'm just here for moral support, Chloe said, holding the screen door open. You're here for guidance, Mark panted. Guide his rear end through the frame. I am not touching the bear's rear end, Chloe protested. They finally maneuvered the beast into the hallway. The hallway, however, was narrow, and Barnaby was wide. Okay, Mark assessed the situation, wiping sweat from his forehead. We have a bottleneck. I'm going to go around to the living room side and pull. Luke, you push from the back. Chloe, you squeeze in between and guide the tray so it doesn't scratch the wall. There isn't room for me in there, Chloe pointed out. You're tiny, Mark dismissed. Like a ferret. Just squeeze in. Against her better judgment, Chloe wedged herself between the wall and the bear. Luke was directly behind her. Ready? Mark called from the other side. Heave, Luke pushed. The bear moved 2 inches and then wedged tight. Stop! Chloe yelped. The tray is caught on the doorframe. Push harder, Mark commanded, unseen from the living room. No, don't push, Chloe yelled. But Luke, following orders and using his considerable strength, gave a mighty shove. With the sound of tearing wood, Barnaby lurched forward, cleared the jam, and then immediately got stuck again, this time wedging the tray firmly against the opposite wall. The result was catastrophic. The bear stopped moving. Chloe, however, did not. She was shoved backward by the momentum, straight into Luke. Luke braced himself against the wall to catch her, but the hallway was too tight. They ended up pinned. Chloe's back was pressed flush against Luke's chest, and in front of her was the furry, unyielding backside of an 8-foot grizzly bear. Mark! Chloe shouted. We're stuck! Hang on! Mark's voice came from the living room. I think his claw is snagged on the carpet. I need to get a screwdriver. Footsteps retreated. A door slammed. Silence descended in the hallway. It was hot. It was cramped. And Chloe was currently trapped between a dead predator and the man she had been fantasizing about for 3 days. She could feel every inch of him. His chest was a hard wall against her back, his belt buckle pressed into her lower spine. His breath was warm on the sensitive skin of her neck. Well, Luke rumbled, his voice vibrating through her body, this is cozy. I'm going to kill Mark, Chloe whispered. I'm going to feed him to Barnaby. Don't move, Luke said sharply. I can't move, Chloe retorted. I am one with the bear. No. Luke's voice was strained, rougher than she had ever heard it. I mean, don't wiggle, because if you wiggle, Chloe, I'm going to lose the last shred of my sanity. Chloe froze. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt. He wasn't just annoyed by the confinement, he was affected. Emboldened by the heat and the absurdity of the situation, Chloe turned her head slightly. She looked up over her shoulder. Luke's face was inches away. He was sweating, a bead of moisture tracking down his temple. His eyes were dark, dilated, and focused on her mouth. You're the safety net, she whispered, throwing his words back at him. The net broke, Luke growled. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for the right moment. He dipped his head and captured her mouth. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't the sweet, tentative peck of a high school romance. It was hungry. It was desperate. It tasted of salt and heat, and 10 years of repressed longing. Chloe made a small sound in her throat and twisted in his arms, trying to get closer, ignoring the fact that she was currently grinding against his duty belt. Her hands found purchase on his shoulders, her fingers digging into the muscle. Luke groaned, a low guttural sound that she felt in her bones. One of his hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss, while the other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. It was chaotic. It was messy. It was the best thing that had ever happened to her. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the taste of him, the feel of his stubble against her chin, the overwhelming solidity of his presence. She forgot about the divorce. She forgot about the bear. She forgot that her brother was currently looking for a screwdriver in the next room. He wants to start the fire, her brain screamed triumphantly. The fire is started. The fire is a raging inferno. Luke broke the kiss, gasping for air, but he didn't let her go. He rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. Chloe, he rasped, I can't be just Mark's friend anymore. I'm done with that. Good, Chloe whispered, her lips swollen and tingling, because I think the friend zone just got condemned. Found it! Mark's voice bellowed from the kitchen, followed by the sound of him jogging back toward them. Luke and Chloe sprang apart, or tried to. The bear prevented any significant distance. Luke jammed his hands into his pockets and stared at the ceiling, looking like he was trying to calculate the square root of pi to keep from exploding. Chloe smoothed her hair frantically and pretended to inspect the bear's fur. Mark popped his head around the corner of the living room, brandishing a flathead screwdriver. Okay, Operation Barnaby is back on! Mark looked at them. He paused. He squinted. Why is it so hot in here? Mark asked. And why do you both look like you just ran a marathon? Luke, your face is red. It's the ventilation, Luke said, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat. Poor airflow. Bad feng shui. Right, Mark said slowly, looking between them with the sudden dawning suspicion. Well, let's get the bear moving, before anyone passes out. With a renewed, frantic energy, they shoved. Luke pushed with the strength of a man who needed to escape the hallway immediately. Barnaby slid into the living room with a screech of protest. Chloe stumbled out into the open space, gulping in the cooler air. She refused to look at Luke. If she looked at him, she would combust. There! Mark dusted his hands together, admiring the bear, which now dominated the room and blocked the view of the television. He looks magnificent. He looks like a nightmare, Luke said, adjusting his belt and walking toward the door. I have to go. I have paperwork. Sheriff stuff. You're leaving? Mark asked. I was going to make grilled cheese sandwiches. To celebrate the bear. Can't, Luke said. He paused at the door and turned back. His eyes found Chloe's. The heat was still there, burning steady and bright, but now it was accompanied by a promise. I'll call you, Luke said to Chloe. We need to finish that conversation. About the ventilation. Yes? Chloe squeaked. Ventilation. Important. Luke nodded once, put his sunglasses on, and walked out the door. Mark watched him go, then turned to Chloe. He pointed the screwdriver at her. "Ventilation?" Mark asked. "It's an HVAC term," Chloe lied, backing toward the kitchen. "You wouldn't understand. I'm going to get a glass of water, a large one, with ice." She fled the room, leaving Mark alone with the bear. Mark looked at Barnaby. "They were totally making out behind your butt, weren't they?" Barnaby stared back with glass eyes, keeping his secrets. Chloe leaned against the refrigerator door, pressing a cold water bottle to her burning cheeks. Her life had officially gone off the rails. She was living with her brother, she was employed as a dinosaur cleaner, and she had just made out with the sheriff behind a dead grizzly bear. And the terrifying part was, she couldn't wait to do it again. But as the adrenaline faded, a new thought crept in. Luke was the safety net. He was the one who always caught her. But now that they had crossed the line, there was no net. If this went wrong, if she broke his heart, or he broke hers, there would be no one to catch them. And in a small town like Thermopolis, when you fell, everyone heard the impact. Chloe looked out the kitchen window. Storm clouds were gathering over the Owl Creek Mountains, dark and purple and heavy with rain. "Well," she whispered to the empty room. "Batten down the hatches." Chapter 7. The structural integrity of hearts and hemlines. Barnaby the bear was judging her. Chloe could feel it. She sat on the living room sofa, staring at the taxidermy grizzly that now dominated the Donovan household like a furry, immobile roommate who refused to pay rent. Barnaby's glass eyes seemed to bore into her soul, silently communicating that he knew exactly what had happened in the hallway yesterday. He knew about the heavy breathing, the desperate clutching of fabric, and the fact that the Hot Springs County Sheriff had kissed her until her toes curled inside her sneakers. Chloe groaned and pulled a throw pillow over her face. It had been 24 hours since the incident of the immobile mammal, and she had successfully managed to avoid Luke Buchanan by employing a strategy of cowardice and closed blinds. Mark walked into the room, eating a bowl of cereal with the casual air of a man who hadn't almost crushed his sister with a forest predator. "You're vibrating again," Mark noted, slurping a spoonful of generic bran flakes. "You are vibrating at a frequency that is going to shatter Barnaby's monocle." "And he doesn't even have a monocle yet. I ordered one on eBay." "I am not vibrating," Chloe lied from beneath the pillow. "I am meditating. You are hiding." Mark sat on the arm of the sofa. "Luke has texted me 3 times, asking if the ventilation issue has been resolved. I told him we opened a window, but he seemed unsatisfied with that answer. Also, you need to get up. The bone ball starts in 4 hours. Chloe lowered the pillow. The bone ball. The annual fundraiser for the Dinosaur Center, an event where the elite of Thermopolis gathered to drink overpriced wine in the shadow of the Jurassic period. As the newest employee of the museum, her attendance was mandatory. "I have nothing to wear," Chloe declared. "All my formal wear is currently in a box labeled Life I Left Behind in the Garage." Mark rolled his eyes. Mom left her closet unlocked. "Wear something of hers. Just not the sequin jumpsuit from 1985. We don't want to blind the donors." Chloe dragged herself off the couch. She was terrified, not of the donors, nor of the potential fashion disasters lurking in her mother's closet. She was terrified of seeing Luke. Because once she saw him, she would have to acknowledge that the safety net was gone, and she was free-falling without a parachute. 3 years ago, the night before Chloe's wedding to Brad was quiet, the kind of stillness that usually precedes a tornado. She sat on the back porch of the ranch, wrapped in a quilt, staring at the stars. Inside, the house was full of sleeping relatives and half-packed suitcases. Her dress was hanging in her old bedroom, a pristine white garment that Brad's mother had selected because it was tasteful and appropriate. The screen door creaked. Chloe didn't turn around. She knew the heavy tread of those boots. Luke walked out, carrying 2 tumblers and a bottle of amber liquid that looked like it could strip paint. He sat on the railing facing her, his back to the dark expanse of the prairie. He wasn't the sheriff then, just a man in a t-shirt and jeans who looked tired. "Cold feet?" Luke asked, offering her a glass. "Frozen," Chloe admitted, taking the whiskey. She took a sip and coughed. "It burns. It cleans the system," Luke said. He watched her over the rim of his glass. His eyes were dark, unreadable pools. "Brad is a good guy," Chloe said, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. "He's stable. He has a 401k. He makes lists." "Lists are good," Luke agreed neutrally. "Lists keep things in order." "I need order," Chloe said, pulling the quilt tighter. "I'm chaotic, Luke. You know that. I lose my keys, I talk too much, I feel things too loudly. Brad, he dampens the noise. He makes me feel safe. Luke set his glass down on the railing with a sharp clink. The sound was loud in the silence. Safe isn't the same as happy, Chloe, he said. His voice was rough. It's close enough, isn't it? Luke looked at her then, really looked at her, with an intensity that made her breath hitch. For a moment, she thought he was going to say something else. She thought he might tell her not to do it. She thought he might reach out and pull the quilt away and tell her that chaos was better than silence. Inside his chest, Luke's heart was breaking with the slow, agonizing crack of a glacier calving. He wanted to tell her that Brad was a bore who would try to iron the sparkle out of her. He wanted to tell her that he loved her loud feelings and her lost keys. But he looked at the ring on her finger, and he looked at the hope and fear warring in her eyes, and he decided he didn't have the right to ruin her life just because he wasn't in it. He stood up. Yeah, Luke lied, forcing a tight smile. It's close enough. Be happy, Chloe. That's all that matters. He had walked back inside, leaving her alone with the stars and a glass of whiskey that tasted like regret. Present day, the Wyoming Dinosaur Center had been transformed. Dr. Vogel had apparently decided that the theme was prehistoric chic, which translated to tablecloths with fern patterns and a string quartet playing orchestral versions of classic rock near the Allosaurus. Chloe stood near the buffet table, smoothing the skirt of the dress she had salvaged from her mother's closet. It was a deep emerald green silk slip dress from the 90s, simple and devastatingly effective. It skimmed her curves like water and left her back entirely bare. She felt exposed, not because of the dress, but because every time the door opened, her heart slammed against her ribs. You look like a swamp goddess, Mark commented, appearing beside her with a plate full of cheese cubes. In a good way. Like, if a swamp goddess cleaned up and used expensive conditioner. Thank you, Mark. Your compliments are as confusing as your home decor choices. Mark pointed a piece of cheddar at her. Don't mock Barnaby, he's a listener. And speaking of listeners, the sheriff just walked in. And he's looking for you. He has that tracking a fugitive look in his eyes. Chloe froze. She turned slowly, shielding herself with a potted fern. Luke stood at the entrance. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He was wearing a black suit that fit him with criminal perfection. The white shirt contrasted sharply with his tan skin, and he had abandoned the tie, leaving the top button undone. He looked dangerous. He looked sophisticated. He looked like the kind of man who could convince a woman to commit a felony and enjoy it. His gaze swept the room with the precision of a radar system. He ignored the mayor. He ignored Dr. Vogel. He ignored the fossilized remains of the Jimbo the Supersaurus. His eyes locked onto Chloe. Even from across the room, she felt the impact. It was physical, a shove to the chest that knocked the breath out of her. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply started walking toward her, moving through the crowd like a shark parting a school of fish. He's coming this way, Mark whispered loudly. Act casual. Talk about fossils. Did you know the Stegosaurus had a brain the size of a walnut? Go away, Mark, Chloe hissed. Mark stuffed 3 cheese cubes into his mouth. Abandoning ship? Good luck? Don't break anything valuable. Mark vanished into the crowd just as Luke arrived. He stopped 2 feet away from her, invading her personal space and consuming all the oxygen in the vicinity. He smelled of soap, starch, and that unique, spicy scent that was just Luke. Hi, Chloe said, her voice sounding breathless and thin. Hi, Luke replied. His voice was lower than the string quartet's cello. His eyes dropped to the neckline of her dress, lingered for a heartbeat, and then traveled slowly back up to her face. That dress is unconstitutional. It's my mother's, Chloe defended weakly. Remind me to thank her, Luke murmured. He stepped closer, eliminating the gap between them. The air around them crackled. Dr. Vogel asked me to provide security tonight. Currently, I'm assessing a threat to public order. Is there a threat? Yeah, Luke's eyes darkened. You're causing a riot in my head, Chloe. Chloe's knees threatened to buckle. This wasn't the brotherly friend who fixed her car. This was the man who had pressed her against a wall behind a bear. We should mingle, Chloe stammered, looking for an escape route. People are watching. Let them watch, Luke said. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, firm, and possessive. I'm done hiding in the hallway. Dance with me. It wasn't a question. He pulled her toward the center of the room, where a small space had been cleared for dancing. The quartet began to play a slow, melancholic rendition of Wild Horses. Luke pulled her into his arms. He didn't hold her at a polite, middle school dance distance. He wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her flesh against him. His hand splayed across the bare skin of her back, his fingers burning brands into her flesh. Chloe had no choice but to rest her hand on his shoulder, feeling the hard muscle beneath the expensive wool of his suit. "You're shaking," Luke murmured against her ear. "I'm cold," she lied. "You're a terrible liar. You've always been a terrible liar. Remember when you told your dad you didn't crash the tractor into the fence? It was a structural failure of the fence," Chloe argued, looking up at him. Luke smiled, and it was a devastating expression, crooked, genuine, and full of heat. "You're shaking because you're scared, Chloe." "I am scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "If we do this, if we start this fire, Luke, what happens if it burns down? You're the only thing that's been constant in my life. If I lose you..." "You won't lose me," Luke said fiercely. He stopped moving, ignoring the other couples swaying around them. He stared down at her, his brown eyes intense. "I'm not Brad. I'm not going to put you on a schedule. I'm not going to dampen the noise. I want the noise. I want the chaos. I want you to crash the tractor." Chloe's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. "But we're different. You're steady. I'm a mess." "Opposites attract," Luke quoted softly. "It's physics. Or chemistry. I failed chemistry, but I know this. I've spent 10 years watching you look for happiness in places that were too small for you. I'm done watching." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. His hand on her back slid lower, resting just above the curve of her hip. "Let me catch you, Chloe. For real this time. Not as a safety net, but as a landing pad." Chloe closed her eyes, breathing him in. The fear was still there, sharp and biting, but beneath it was something else. A thrill. A sense of rightness that she hadn't felt in years. Before she could answer, a shrill voice cut through the romantic atmosphere like a circular saw. "Well, isn't this a scene straight out of a soap opera?" They pulled apart, startled. Mrs. Higgins stood there, clutching a glass of white wine and looking like a disgruntled parakeet in a floral muumuu. "Sheriff!" Mrs. Higgins barked. "I have a complaint!" "The raccoon is back. I saw him peering through my window. He looked vengeful. And here you are, dancing with the Donovan girl while my biscuits are in peril." Luke closed his eyes and exhaled a long, suffering breath. "Mrs. Higgins, the raccoon was relocated to the Wind River Canyon. It is physically impossible for him to be at your window unless he caught a Greyhound bus." "He has determination," Mrs. Higgins insisted. "And you, Chloe Donovan. I heard you were back. Running away from the city? Couldn't handle the traffic?" Chloe straightened her spine. The old Chloe would have shrunk away. The old Chloe would have mumbled an apology. But the new Chloe was wearing a killer green dress and was currently being held by the hottest man in the county. "Actually, Mrs. Higgins," Chloe smiled sweetly, "I came back for the dinosaurs. And the company." She looked up at Luke. Mrs. Higgins huffed, realizing she wasn't going to get a rise out of them. "Well, HMPH. Don't let him step on your toes. He has big feet." She waddled away toward the shrimp cocktail. Luke looked down at Chloe, a mixture of amusement and relief on his face. "Did you just sass Mrs. Higgins?" "She insulted my life choices," Chloe shrugged. "And she insulted your feet. I felt defensive." Luke laughed, a rich, deep sound that made several donors turn their heads. "God, I missed you." He didn't pull her back into a dance. Instead, he took her hand and began walking toward the exit. "Where are we going?" Chloe asked, stumbling slightly in her heels to keep up with his long strides. "We're leaving," Luke said, "but the fundraiser." Mark is fine." Mark is currently explaining the structural integrity of the bear to a very confused geologist. "And the fundraiser has plenty of money." He pushed open the heavy glass doors, leading her out into the cool night air. The parking lot was dark, illuminated only by a few street lamps and the vast canopy of stars. He stopped at his truck. His personal truck, not the cruiser. He turned to her, his expression serious. "I'm taking you home," Luke said, "not to Mark's house, to my place. Because if I kiss you again in front of the Supersaurus, I'm going to get arrested for public indecency, and I'm the one who has the handcuffs." Chloe's breath caught. His place. She had been there 100 times, but always as Mark's little sister. Always as a guest. This was different. This was a threshold. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Luke reached out and cupped her face in his large, warm hands. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Chloe. I'm tired of the timeline. I'm tired of the what-ifs. I want the now. Chloe looked at him. She saw the boy who had carried her when she scraped her knee. She saw the teenager who had driven her to get ice cream. She saw the man who had let her go because he loved her enough to want her happiness. And she realized, with a sudden, blinding clarity, that she didn't want a safety net. She wanted to fly. "Okay," Chloe said softly. "Take me home, Sheriff." Luke didn't waste time. He opened the passenger door for her, and for once he didn't make a joke about the car. He helped her in as if she were made of precious glass, shut the door, and walked around to the driver's side. As they pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the dinosaurs and the gossip behind, Chloe looked out the window. The reflection in the glass showed a woman in a green dress with a terrified, exhilarated smile on her face. Mark's text message pinged on her phone in her purse. "Mark, did you just get abducted? Do I need to form a posse? Or should I just put the bear in charge of the house?" Chloe ignored it. She reached across the console and placed her hand on Luke's forearm. He turned his hand over immediately, lacing his fingers with hers, anchoring her to him. The road ahead was dark, winding, and uncertain. But for the first time since she had arrived back in Thermopolis, Chloe wasn't looking in the rearview mirror. She was looking straight ahead. And the view was spectacular. Chapter 8. The Aerodynamics of Silk and Surrender. The interior of Luke Buchanan's pickup truck was a sovereign nation of calm, governed by the scent of pine air freshener and the low hum of the heater. Chloe Donovan, however, was currently staging a one-woman coup of anxiety in the passenger seat. She stared out the window as the familiar landmarks of Thermopolis blurred past. The jagged silhouette of the Owl Creek Mountains, the steam rising from the hot springs like ghosts of tourists passed, and the neon sign of the Taco John's, where she had once broken up with a boy because he refused to share his potato olays. Her internal monologue was screaming. It was a high-pitched, continuous shriek that sounded suspiciously like a smoke detector. "You are going to Luke's house. You are wearing your mother's vintage silk slip dress. You are currently holding hands with the sheriff, and his thumb is doing things to your knuckles that should be illegal in at least 12 states. Luke, by contrast, drove with the relaxed confidence of a man who had made a decision and intended to see it through to the end. His hand on the steering wheel was steady, though his knuckles were white. He wasn't nearly as calm as he looked. In fact, Luke Buchanan was currently running a mental diagnostic on his entire life and realizing that every road he had ever taken had been leading to this specific drive, with this specific chaotic woman next to him. He glanced over at her. The green silk of her dress pooled around her legs like liquid emeralds. She looked terrified. She also looked beautiful enough to stop traffic, which was fortunate, considering there was no traffic on the county road leading to his cabin. "You're vibrating again?" Luke said, his voice low and amused. "You're going to shake the bolts loose on the door panel." "I am not vibrating," Chloe lied, gripping the door handle. "I am shivering. It's the air conditioning. It's Arctic in here. Are you transporting organs? Is there a cooler of kidneys in the back?" "The heat is on, Chloe," Luke pointed out. "You're nervous." "I'm not nervous. I'm anticipating." "Anticipating what?" "Disaster," she admitted. "Explosions, a meteor strike. Mark popping out of the glove box with a kazoo?" Luke squeezed her hand. "Mark is currently at the museum, likely trying to convince a donor that the Supersaurus is haunted. We're alone." The truck turned onto a gravel driveway that wound up a small rise. Luke's house sat at the top, a sturdy log cabin that looked exactly like him. Solid, unpretentious, and built to withstand a Wyoming winter. The porch light was on, casting a warm yellow glow against the dark timber. Chloe's heart did a traitorous double backflip. She had been here before, of course. She had been here for barbecues, for Super Bowl parties, for nights when the power went out in town and Luke had the only generator. But she had never been here as Chloe. She had always been Mark's little sister, a title that came with an invisible force field of platonic affection. Tonight, the force field was down, and the air was thin. 11 years ago, the Hot Springs County Fair was a sensory overload of fried dough, screaming children, and livestock that smelled like, well, livestock. 16-year-old Chloe was currently sitting on a hay bale behind the 4-H barn, crying into a cloud of pink cotton candy. She had just been disqualified from the barrel racing competition. Her horse, a temperamental mare named Nutmeg, had decided that the second barrel was actually a terrifying monster and had bucked Chloe off into the dirt in front of the entire high school. The humiliation was total. It was absolute. "Hey," a voice said from above. Chloe looked up through her tear-blurred mascara. Luke stood there, holding 2 corn dogs. He was 22, working security for the fair, wearing a yellow t-shirt that said event staff and tight jeans that were the subject of much discussion among the varsity cheerleading squad. Go away, Chloe sniffled. I'm contemplating running away to join a circus, though I suppose I've already provided the clown act for the evening. Luke sat down on the hay bale next to her. He didn't say anything about the fall. He didn't offer platitudes. He just handed her a corn dog. Mustard, Luke said. It helps with the shock. Chloe took the corn dog. I looked like an idiot. Brad Miller laughed. I saw him. Brad Miller is afraid of goats, Luke said, taking a bite of his own dinner. His opinion is invalid. I hit the dirt so hard I think I bounced, she wailed. You tucked and rolled, Luke corrected gently. It was good form, tactical. Most people would have flailed. You didn't. He turned to look at her, his brown eyes serious under the brim of his ball cap. Getting thrown is part of the ride, Chloe. It's gravity. It's physics. It doesn't mean you can't ride. It just means today, gravity won. I hate gravity, she muttered, wiping her nose on her sleeve. Yeah, Luke smiled, bumping his shoulder against hers. It's a pain. But it keeps us grounded. Come on. I get off shift in 10 minutes. Let's go win a goldfish. I'm pretty sure the ring toss is rigged, but I have a badge, so maybe they'll let me lean over the counter. He had stood up and offered her a hand to pull her off the hay bale. For a second, as she gripped his calloused palm, she felt a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the fall. But she was 16 and he was Luke, and the moment passed like a cloud shadow over the prairie. Present-day gravity was currently working very hard to pull Chloe toward Luke as he cut the engine. The silence of the countryside rushed in, filled only by the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. We're here, Luke said. Yes, Chloe whispered. We are. They got out of the truck. The gravel crunched loudly under her heels as she walked toward the porch. Luke was right behind her, a warm, solid presence that shielded her from the wind. He unlocked the front door and pushed it open, gesturing for her to enter. The living room was neat. Annoyingly neat. There were no piles of mail, no discarded shoes, no half-finished craft projects. Just comfortable leather furniture, a stone fireplace, and a massive bookshelf filled with historical biographies and thrillers. You really need a junk drawer, Chloe observed, stepping inside and hugging her bare arms. This level of organization is suspicious. It suggests you don't have a soul. I have a soul, Luke said, closing the door and locking out the world. I just keep it in the garage with my tools. He tossed his keys into a bowl on the entry table, the only sign of disorder in the room. Then he turned to her. The humor faded from his face, replaced by that intense, hungry look that had been stalking her all night. He took off his suit jacket and tossed it onto the armchair, then loosened his tie, pulling it free from his collar with a fluid motion that made Chloe's mouth go dry. Chloe, he said. Luke, she squeaked. Come here. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. A plea. Chloe crossed the room. She stopped a foot away from him, her heart hammering against the silk of her dress. I'm scared, she admitted again. If we do this, Mark is going to be weird. The town is going to talk. Mrs. Higgins will write letters to the editor. Let them talk, Luke said. He reached out and took her hands, pulling her that final, crucial foot until her body bumped against his. I don't care about the town. I don't care about Mark's weirdness. I care about the fact that for 10 years, I've watched you try to fit yourself into boxes that were too small for you. He released her hands and slid his arms around her waist, locking them at the small of her back. The heat of his body soaked through the thin silk instantly. I'm not a box, Chloe whispered, looking up at him. I'm a mess. You're a masterpiece, Luke corrected. Abstract art. Colorful, chaotic, perfect. He lowered his head and kissed her. This wasn't the desperate, frantic kiss from behind the bear. This was slow, deliberate. It was a thorough exploration, a tasting of lips and breath that felt like coming home after a long, exhausting journey. Chloe melted. There was no other word for it. Her bones turned to liquid, her anxieties evaporated, and her hands wound their way up his chest to grip the white cotton of his shirt. Luke walked her backward until her legs hit the edge of the sturdy oak dining table. He lifted her effortlessly, setting her onto the surface so they were eye level. He stepped between her knees, the friction of the silk against his suit trousers creating a static charge that could have powered the entire grid of Hot Springs County. Luke? She breathed against his mouth. The table. You eat here. I'll sanitize it later, he growled, trailing kisses down her jawline to the sensitive spot beneath her ear. Right now, it's serving a higher purpose. Chloe threw her head back, a gasp escaping her throat. Higher purpose, I like that. Just as Luke's hand found the strap of her dress, a loud, rhythmic thump 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 echoed from the hallway. They froze. A golden retriever with only 3 legs hopped into the room, carrying a stuffed hedgehog in its mouth. The dog stopped, looked at Luke, looked at Chloe on the table, and let out a low, judgmental woof. Luke rested his forehead against Chloe's shoulder and groaned. Tripod. Buddy, not now. You have a dog, Chloe said, staring at the animal. A 3-legged dog. I adopted him last year, Luke muttered, not moving away from her. He lost a leg to a combine harvester. He has abandonment issues and a fetish for stuffed hedgehogs. Tripod wagged his tail, the thump-thump resuming against the floorboards. He dropped the hedgehog and nudged Luke's leg with a wet nose. Chloe started to laugh. She couldn't help it. The tension, the romance, the sheer intensity of the moment collided with the reality of a handicapable dog demanding attention. She buried her face in Luke's neck, her shoulders shaking. I'm trying to seduce you, Luke said into her hair, though she could feel him smiling, and my dog is cock-blocking me. It's charming, Chloe gasped, lifting her head. She reached out and scratched Tripod behind the ears. Hi, buddy. I'm Chloe. I'm currently on the dining table. It's a whole thing. Tripod licked her hand, seemingly accepting the situation, then picked up his hedgehog and hopped away into the kitchen, his claws clicking on the hardwood. Luke looked back at Chloe. The laughter died down, leaving a warm, tender silence between them. This is what you get with me, Luke said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. 3-legged dogs. Early mornings. Small town drama. I'm not sophisticated, Chloe. I don't have an espresso machine. I drink Folgers. I hate espresso, Chloe said. It gives me palpitations, and I like dogs, especially the ones that survive combines. She framed his face with her hands, looking into those steady brown eyes that had seen her through braces, breakups, and breakdowns. I don't want sophisticated, Luke. I tried sophisticated. It was cold. It was lonely. I want this. I want the guy who saved me from the Ferris wheel. I want the guy who helped me move a bear. Luke's expression crumbled into something raw and open. You remember the Ferris wheel? I remember everything, she whispered. Every time you caught me. Every time you were there. I was just too scared to admit that the safety net was actually the destination. Luke didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He kissed her again, and this time, there was no holding back. He swept the remaining distance away, his hands possessive on her waist, his mouth claiming hers with a fierceness that promised he would never let her go. His phone buzzed on the entryway table. Then it buzzed again. And again. Ignore it, Luke murmured against her lips. It might be Mark, Chloe panted. The bear might have fallen on him. If the bear fell on him, he'd call 911, not me. Luke reasoned, his hand sliding up her thigh, the silk bunching under his fingers. The phone buzzed a 4th time. It's persistent, Chloe noted, her resolve weakening as Luke's lips moved to her collarbone. It's Mark. Luke sighed, pulling back slightly. He has a 6th sense for when I'm about to be happy, and he feels a biological imperative to ruin it. He walked over to the table, grabbed the phone, and looked at the screen. He snorted. What is it? Chloe asked, smoothing her dress, though her lips were swollen and her hair was a disaster. He sent a picture, Luke said, turning the phone around. On the screen was a selfie of Mark, wearing a feather boa, giving a thumbs up next to Dr. Vogel, who looked like she was reconsidering her entire career path. The caption read, Vogel says the Supersaurus toe is sparkling. You're welcome. Also, Mom called. She wants to know if Luke is courting you or just kidnapping you. I told her it was a consensual kidnapping. Consensual kidnapping, Chloe mused. That sounds like a felony. With me, it's just a Tuesday, Luke said. He tossed the phone onto the sofa, effectively silencing the outside world. He walked back to her, standing between her knees again. The humor was still in his eyes, but underneath it was the fire he had promised to start. Where were we? He asked. You were explaining the structural integrity of the dining table. Chloe smiled. The table is solid oak, Luke said, leaning in until their foreheads touched. It can handle the weight. The question is, can you handle me? I wrestled a Triceratops, Chloe reminded him, wrapping her legs around his waist. I think I can handle a sheriff. Prove it, Luke challenged. And as he lifted her from the table and carried her toward the bedroom, leaving the empty dining room and the judgmental ghost of the hedgehog behind, Chloe knew one thing for certain. She wasn't falling anymore. She had landed, and the ground beneath her feet was solid, warm, and felt exactly like love. The bedroom was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the blinds. Luke set her down by the side of the bed. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the zipper of her dress. "Chloe?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Are you sure?" She looked at him. The man who had been her brother's friend, her protector, her safety net. The man who had waited 10 years for her to stop looking at the horizon and look at him. "I'm sure," she said, stepping out of the green silk and letting it fall to the floor like a shedding skin. "I'm finally sure." Luke groaned, a sound of pure worship, and pulled her down onto the bed. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled around the eaves of the cabin. Inside, the fire was finally, truly lit. And this time, Chloe knew, nobody was going to put it out. The next morning arrived with the subtlety of a brass band. Chloe woke up, tangled in sheets that smelled of Luke, soap, man, and contentment. She stretched, feeling a delightful soreness in muscles she hadn't used since her Pilates phase in 2019. She rolled over. The other side of the bed was empty. Panic, her old friend, knocked on the door of her brain. He regrets it. He left. He's currently filing for a restraining order. Then she heard the clatter of pans from the kitchen. Chloe sat up, pulling Luke's discarded white dress shirt from the floor and slipping it on. It hung to her mid-thighs, swallowing her whole. She padded barefoot down the hallway, guided by the smell of coffee and bacon? She stopped in the kitchen doorway. Luke was standing at the stove, wearing nothing but a pair of gray sweatpants that hung low on his hips. His back was to her, the muscles flexing as he flipped something in a skillet. Tripod was sitting at his feet, watching the bacon with religious intensity. "Morning," Luke said without turning around. "Coffee is in the pot. Bacon is almost done. Tripod thinks he deserves a piece, but his cholesterol is high." Chloe leaned against the doorframe, watching him. This domestic scene, the man, the dog, the bacon, was terrifying. It was real. It was permanent, and she loved it. "Does Tripod have a medical plan?" Chloe asked, walking over to the coffee maker. Luke turned around. His eyes swept over her, taking in the messy hair and his shirt buttoned wrong. A slow, lazy smile spread across his face, a smile that made her toes curl all over again. "He's on my insurance," Luke said. He abandoned the bacon and walked over to her, boxing her in against the counter. "You look good in my shirt, better than I do." "It's the tailoring," Chloe said, clutching her coffee mug. "So, is this?" "Yes," Luke said firmly. He leaned down and kissed her, tasting of coffee and morning. "We are. This is, and if you try to run away, I will arrest you. I'll make up a charge. Grand theft heart. It's a serious offense." "That was cheesy," Chloe laughed against his lips. "That was incredibly cheesy, Sheriff." "I'm a romantic," Luke shrugged. "Sue me." "I might just keep you instead," she whispered. Before Luke could respond, a heavy pounding shook the front door. "Open up! Police!" Mark's voice bellowed from the porch. "I know you're in there. I saw Chloe's shoes on the porch. Also, Mom is in the car and she has a casserole. Surrender peacefully." Luke dropped his forehead onto Chloe's shoulder. "I'm going to kill him. It's premeditated. I have a shovel in the shed." "He brought casserole," Chloe pointed out, giggling. "We can't kill him until we get the food," Luke sighed, the sound of a man who knew his fate was sealed. He stepped back, looking at Chloe with a mixture of exasperation and profound love. "Fine," Luke said. "We get the casserole, then we kill him." "Deal," Chloe agreed. As Luke walked to the door to let in the chaos that was the Donovan family, Chloe took a sip of her coffee. The sun was streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Barnaby the bear was back at the ranch. The Supersaurus had sparkly toes. Her car was dead, and she was technically unemployed until Monday. But as she watched Luke unlock the door, ready to face the music and her mother, Chloe smiled. Her life was a mess, but for the first time it was a beautiful, shared, wonderful mess. And she wouldn't trade it for all the alphabetical spice racks in the world. Chapter 9. The Structural Integrity of Happily Ever After. The front door of Luke Buchanan's cabin did not so much open as it surrendered to the overwhelming force of nature that was the Donovan family. Luke stood in the doorway, blocking the view of the interior with his broad shoulders, a tactic that was both gallant and entirely futile. Standing on the porch were Mark, looking smug in a t-shirt that read, "I paused my game to be here," and Barbara Donovan, the matriarch of Thermopolis, clutching a Pyrex dish covered in tinfoil as if it contained the nuclear codes. "Good morning, Lucas," Barbara said, breezing past him with a maneuver she had perfected during the Great Black Friday Stampede of 1998. "I assumed you two would be hungry. It's tater tot casserole. It creates structural stability in the stomach." Mark leaned against the doorframe, grinning at Luke. "You look tired, Sheriff. Rough night patrolling the perimeter?" Luke ran a hand through his hair, debating the merits of exile versus homicide. "Mark, if you say one more word, I'm going to arrest you for disturbing the peace. My peace. Specifically." "I have rights," Mark chirped, stepping inside. "I have a casserole." Inside the kitchen, Chloe was currently trying to merge with the refrigerator. She was wearing Luke's dress shirt, which hit her mid-thigh, and she was holding a coffee mug like a shield. She looked disheveled, guilty, and radiant. Barbara set the dish on the counter, eyed the three-legged dog who was sniffing her sensible shoes, and then turned her laser-like focus on her daughter. "Hello, Chloe," Barbara said, her tone deceptively mild. "Nice shirt. It's a bit big in the shoulders, don't you think?" "It's breathable," Chloe squeaked, "for the humidity." "Wyoming has 9% humidity," Mark pointed out helpfully, grabbing a piece of bacon from the skillet Luke had abandoned. "But nice try." Barbara ignored her son. She walked over to Chloe, reached out, and smoothed the collar of the oversized shirt. For a second, Chloe braced herself for a lecture on propriety, or the swift judgment of a woman who ironed her sheets. Instead, Barbara's eyes softened. She saw the flush on Chloe's cheeks, the absence of the haunted look that had shadowed her daughter since the divorce, and the way Chloe's bare feet were curled into the floorboards as if she finally had traction. "Well," Barbara said, patting Chloe's cheek, "it's about time. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in a root cellar until you figured it out." Chloe blinked. You knew?" "Chloe, honey," Barbara sighed, opening the silverware drawer and beginning to set the table with the familiarity of someone who had cleaned this house more often than its owner. "I'm a mother. I know everything. I knew Luke was in love with you when you were 12, and he punched Tommy Miller for stealing your bicycle. I just didn't know it would take you 15 years and a divorce to notice." Luke, who had closed the front door and was leaning against it, looking like a man facing a firing squad, cleared his throat. "I didn't punch him. I detained him aggressively." "He lost a tooth," Mark added through a mouthful of bacon. "It was awesome. 14 years ago, the gym at Hot Springs County High was decorated with crepe paper streamers that were slowly drooping in the heat. It was the sophomore sock hop, an event that smelled of teenage anxiety and cheap cologne. 13-year-old Chloe was standing by the punch bowl, wearing a dress that had too many ruffles. She was trying to be invisible. She had just overheard a group of girls laughing about her braces. 19-year-old Luke, home from the police academy for the weekend, leaned against the back wall. He wasn't supposed to be there, but Mark had dragged him along to, quote, "scout the talent," a phrase Luke found repulsive. Luke watched Chloe. He saw her shoulders hunch. He saw the way she tugged at her ruffles. He felt a protective surge in his chest that terrified him, because it wasn't just big brotherly affection, it was a fierce, possessive anger at anyone who made her feel small. He watched as a boy approached her. Tommy Miller. Luke tensed. Tommy whispered something. Chloe's face crumpled. Luke didn't think. He didn't calculate. He pushed off the wall, crossed the gym floor in long, angry strides, and inserted himself between Chloe and the boy. "Problem here?" Luke asked, his voice dropping to a register that made Tommy Miller squeak. "No," Tommy stammered. "Just talking." "Walk away," Luke ordered. When the boy fled, Luke turned to Chloe. She was fighting back tears. "He said I have metal mouth," she whispered. "He has a mullet," Luke pointed out. "His argument is invalid." "Want to get out of here? Mark has the truck. We can go get milkshakes." "I can't," she sniffled. "I have to wait for the slow dance. It's a tradition." "Fine," Luke said. When the DJ put on "I Don't Want to Miss a Thing," Luke didn't hesitate. He bowed, formally and ridiculously. "May I?" He danced with her. He kept a respectful distance, his hands light on her waist, but he glared at anyone who dared to look at her sideways. He knew then, with the terrifying clarity of youth, that she was going to be trouble. He knew he would wait for her, even if it took forever. Present day. The breakfast table was a study in chaotic domesticity. The casserole was surprisingly good, mostly because it was 90% cheese. Tripod the dog sat under the table, resting his chin on Barbara's knee, having correctly identified the weak link in the food security chain. So, Mark said, pointing a fork at Luke. What's the plan? Are we doing a shotgun wedding? Because I have a shotgun. Several, actually. Mark, eat your tots, Luke said calmly. He reached under the table and rested his hand on Chloe's knee. It was a grounding touch, warm and heavy. There is no plan. We are figuring it out. We are dating, Chloe corrected, feeling a surge of bravery. We are dating, and I am going to keep working at the museum, and eventually, I am going to get my own place because living with Mark involves too much taxidermy. You can't move out, Mark protested. Barnaby has grown attached to you. Barnaby is a fire hazard, Chloe countered. You could stay here, Luke said. The table went silent. Even Tripod stopped chewing. Luke looked at Chloe, his brown eyes serious and vulnerable. I have the room. I have the dog. I have a coffee maker that you hate, but I can buy a new one. An espresso machine. With the frother thing. Chloe's heart did a complicated gymnastic routine. It was fast. It was crazy. It was statistically probable to end in disaster. But looking at Luke, steady, unshakable Luke, who had loved her through her awkward phase, her marriage, and her divorce, she realized that statistics were for people who didn't have a sheriff on their side. I have a lot of boxes, Chloe warned, and I have a collection of ceramic frogs that I can't explain. I like frogs, Luke said. And the car, Chloe added. My Honda is deceased. I am currently a pedestrian. About that, Luke said, wiping his mouth with a napkin, I have something to show you. In the barn. 10 minutes later, the entire Donovan clan, plus one three-legged dog, stood in front of the large metal pole barn behind Luke's cabin. The morning sun was bright, gleaming off the red dirt and the distant peaks of the Owl Creek Mountains. Luke rolled up the heavy door. The smell of oil, metal, and old leather wafted out. Sitting in the center of the bay was a truck. It wasn't new. It was a 1978 Ford F-150, painted a shade of blue that matched the Wyoming sky. It was pristine, polished to a mirror shine, with tires that looked like they could climb a vertical wall. I bought it off Old Man Jenkins 6 months ago, Luke said, rubbing the back of his neck. I've been restoring it, new engine, new transmission, suspension lift. It's sturdy. Chloe stared at the truck. She walked around it, running her hand along the cool metal of the fender. You restored a truck, she whispered. For who? For you, Luke admitted. I started working on it when you told me you were visiting. I thought you might need something that could handle the rough roads. Something that wouldn't break down when things got hot. He wasn't talking about the truck. Chloe knew that. He was talking about them. He was talking about providing a vehicle for her independence that was strong enough to carry her baggage and reliable enough to get her home. She turned to him. Tears pricked her eyes, not the sad tears of the divorce, but the hot, overwhelming tears of being completely, thoroughly seen. It's blue, she choked out. My favorite color. I know, Luke said. He dangled a set of keys from his finger. It's yours, Chloe, no strings, just 4 wheels and a working radiator. Mark let out a low whistle. Okay, that's good, that's solid. I got her a helmet with flames on it, and you got her a vintage truck. I concede victory. Barbara sniffled loudly and began rummaging in her purse for a tissue. Oh, for heaven's sake, just kiss him, Chloe, or I will. Chloe didn't need to be told twice. She launched herself at Luke. He caught her easily, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her off the ground as she buried her face in his neck. I love you, she whispered into his skin. I love you, and I love the truck, and I think I might even love the dog. I love you too, Luke rumbled against her ear, and Tripod knows. He's very intuitive. 2 months later, the Star Plunge mineral pool was steaming gently in the cool September air. The tourists had thinned out, leaving the locals to reclaim their territory. Chloe Donovan sat on the edge of the pool, her legs dangling in the warm water. She was wearing a new bikini, red this time, and she was holding a plastic tumbler of margarita. Floating in the center of the pool was a purple Triceratops. However, Trixie was no longer alone. Next to her floated a bright green inflatable T-Rex. Luke surfaced next to Chloe, shaking water from his hair like a wet otter. He rested his arms on the concrete deck, looking up at her with a grin that made her stomach flip, even after 8 weeks of waking up next to him. The T-Rex is listing to the left, Luke observed. I think he has a puncture wound. Tripod bit him, Chloe admitted, taking a sip of her drink. He thought it was a giant squeaky toy. I patched it with duct tape. Duct tape fixes everything, Luke agreed. He climbed out of the pool, water sluicing off his broad chest. He sat next to her, wrapping a towel around his shoulders and pulling her into his side. Life had settled into a rhythm that was chaotic, loud, and perfect. Chloe was officially the assistant curator at the Dinosaur Center, a job that mostly involved keeping children from climbing the Diplodocus and ensuring Dr. Vogel drank enough water. She had moved into Luke's cabin, bringing with her the ceramic frogs, which were now engaged in a turf war with Luke's eclectic collection of fishing lures. Market eventually accepted the new dynamic, mostly because Luke let him drive the vintage Ford whenever he wanted, and Chloe had agreed not to report Barnaby the bear to the zoning commission. You okay? Luke asked, kissing her temple. I'm perfect, Chloe said, leaning her head on his shoulder. I was just thinking. Dangerous, Luke teased. I was thinking about gravity, she said. You told me once that getting thrown is part of the ride, that gravity keeps us grounded. I sound very wise, Luke mused. I should write fortune cookies. You were right, Chloe said, looking at the red cliffs rising above them, ancient and unyielding. I spent so much time trying to float, trying to be something light and easy for Brad. But I like the ground. I like the dirt. I like being here, with you. Luke tightened his arm around her. You're not grounded, Chloe. You're rooted. There's a difference. Roots let you grow. Okay, fortune cookie, she laughed, turning to face him. Shut up and kiss me. Yes, ma'am, Luke said. He kissed her, tasting of chlorine and lime and forever. It was a kiss that promised arguments over the thermostat, compromise over pizza toppings, and decades of watching the Wyoming sun set over the Owl Creek Mountains. From the pool, the purple Triceratops bobbed in the ripples, bumping gently against the duct-tape T-Rex. They floated together, a ridiculous, prehistoric pair, drifting in the warm water, perfectly content to just be. Chloe broke the kiss and looked at the floats. You know, she said, Trixie looks happy. She finally found a partner who can handle her pointy bits, Luke said with a wicked grin. Chloe slapped his arm playfully. Watch it, Sheriff. I am watching, Luke said, his eyes full of love. I'm not looking anywhere else. And as the sun dipped below the rim of the canyon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Chloe Donovan knew that she had finally, truly come home. The dinosaur was inflated, the drink was cold, and the man beside her was absolutely, unequivocally hers. It was a truth universally acknowledged that a divorced woman in possession of a vintage truck and a hot sheriff must be in want of absolutely nothing at all.